2009.
Lindsay, you ready? This hearing of the Senate Judiciary Committee will come to order. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's hearing. It's the first committee hearing of the 118th Congress. Allow me the opportunity to share some good news about the committee. Last Congress was productive. We reported nearly 40 bipartisan bills, including bills that were ultimately signed into law to protect survivors of sexual assault and harassment, protect the safety of federal judges and their families, invest and support law enforcement, and more. We restored the committee's oversight role over the Justice Department, Department of Homeland Security, and FBI, and held numerous bipartisan hearings on topics ranging from the fate of the Federal Bureau of Prisons to the FBI's mishandling of the Larry Nassar investigation to holding war criminals accountable in our country. We worked in a successful fashion to fill vacancies on the federal court, the Justice Department, the Sentencing Commission, and more. We did all this despite the challenges of an evenly divided committee and Senate. Although he's not here at the moment, I want to thank Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa for his service as ranking committee member in the last Congress. He was a real partner in ensuring the business of this committee was done. And I'd like to welcome the new ranking member, my friend, Senator Lindsey Graham. He and I have worked together on many issues over many years, and I look forward to working with him again and all the members of the committee during the next 2 years. I'd now like to turn to the subject of today's hearings, which focus on competition in the ticketing and live entertainment industry. Live event ticketing garnered a lot of attention toward the end of 2022, most notably in November when Ticketmaster systems failed during the pre-sale for Taylor Swift's new tour, leaving millions of fans stuck in virtual queues for hours waiting to buy tickets. While Ticketmaster and its parent company, Live Nation Entertainment, have offered explanations for these issues are symptomatic, I think, of a larger problem. The ticketing and live entertainment markets lack competition, and they are dominated by a single entity, Live Nation. Live Nation merged with Ticketmaster in 2010 in a deal that joined the country's largest ticketing company, with its largest event promoter. The Justice Department and attorneys general from many states, including Illinois, sued to block the merger. The plaintiffs ultimately allowed the merger to go through, but put in place a consent decree with a set of conditions and divestitures designed to ensure competition in ticketing and live entertainment markets. Unfortunately, that consent decree does not appear to have been effective. In the decade plus since the merger, Live Nation has consolidated its dominant position in the ticketing and live entertainment markets, and the result is a competition-killing strategy that has left artists and fans paying the price. Before turning to Senator Graham, I'd like to thank Senator Klobuchar, who has brought competition policy to the forefront of our national conversation as chair of the Subcommittee on Competition Policy, Antitrust, and Consumer Rights, and also thank her ranking member, Senator Mike Lee of Utah. Senator Klobuchar and Senator Lee asked for this hearing and have led the effort in putting it together. They have assembled an expert panel of witnesses who will discuss how ticketing and live entertainment markets became so concentrated to the detriment of consumers, the impacts of that concentration, and the steps we need to take to bring competition back. I'm going to turn to Senator Graham for opening remarks. Then Senators Klobuchar and Lee will speak. Then I'll welcome and swear in the 6 witnesses, and at that point hand the gavel to Senator Klobuchar to continue. Senator Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're in a new Congress, a chance to start over and move forward, hopefully in a productive fashion. I think this hearing today represents the best of the committee. I want to thank Senator Lee and Senator Klobuchar for coming together, bringing us together over a matter that matters to a lot of Americans. I think sort of the big theme here today is consolidation of power in the hands of few can create problems for the many. Competition is a good thing. And we'll determine today what happened, how did the system fail so spectacularly, what can we do in the future. But I think this hearing, and maybe the fruits of this hearing, represents sort of the better nature of the Judiciary Committee. We have a reputation of fighting among ourselves, which is okay, because we have differences of what should happen in the country, but we also have a reputation of being able to solve problems for the nation, and I intend to do both. Senator Grassley was a great ranking member. I know our chairman well. I admire Senator Durbin. He's a man can fight, but he can also find consensus. And social media seems to be one of the areas that the Congress and the public is desirous of us doing something. These companies are the most powerful on the planet. They have almost unlimited money. They can't be sued, and there's no real regulatory environment. So, Mr. Chairman, if you're looking for something to do together, I think dealing with the problem of social media would be something the committee should focus on. I look forward to working with you. And this hearing today is a sign that the Judiciary Committee is in business early on in the new Congress. And out of this hearing, I hope we can make a better experience for the consumer, being able to buy tickets to things that you want to see without such a debacle. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Graham. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Chair Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, for holding this hearing and working with Senator Lee and myself. This is clearly a bipartisan endeavor. We have interest from both sides of the aisle, and I think you all know, as Senator Durbin mentioned, that competition policy is very important to me. I believe in capitalism, and to have a strong capitalist system, you have to have competition. You can't have too much consolidation, something that unfortunately for this country, as a ode to Taylor Swift, I will say, we know all too well. In over 75% of our industries, ranging from agriculture to pharmaceuticals to tech to live events, a smaller number of large companies now control more of the business than they did 20 years ago. At the end of last year, I worked with members of this committee and our bipartisan partners, particularly I want to mention Senator Grassley, and over in the House, Nagu, Cicilline, and Buck, to finally update our merger fee statute that had not been updated for decades. That is going to bring in $100 million a year for our enforcement agencies, from the Justice Department to the FTC. It is really important. We also passed a key bill that Senator Lee has been advocating for on venue with the tech companies and allowing the state AGs to keep the cases in the states where they bring them. I think you're going to see more cases and more investigations coming out of the Justice Department. Watch for it, and I think that's going to be very important. But why am I here today and have taken this on? I love music. So I grew up in the suburbs in high school. I remember loading into Johnny Royer's van and with my friends and going off to see Led Zeppelin and the Cars and Aerosmith. And now I don't think it's very easy for high school kids to make their money at Baker Square Pie Shop on the weekends and buy tickets to these major concerts. My state also has made more than its share of contributions to music, from Prince to Bob Dylan to Lizzo, and in fact, First Avenue, the iconic event space where Prince got his start and was made famous in the movie Purple Rain, is a point of pride for the people in our state, and it's one of the reasons Senator Cornyn and I worked so hard to pass the Save Our Stages bill, which was the biggest investment in the arts in the history of America. So whether it's for fans, performers, promoters, or venue operators, we need to make sure we have competition to bring prices down and bring innovation in and stop the fiascos. Today, Live Nation doesn't just dominate the ticketing. It's about 70% of the big concert market, but also they own many of the major venues. And for the venues that they don't own, they tend to lock in on 3, 5, 7-year agreements, which means that the competitors that are out there aren't able to even compete when it comes to the ticketing. Finally, they dominate the promoting. So we have talked to many venues, some of which aren't willing to come forward, unlike one of them that is here today, but that say even if they're not out there threatening them, they're afraid to go to someone else because then they're not going to get the acts that they want. This is all a definition of monopoly because Live Nation is so powerful that it doesn't even need to exert pressure. It doesn't need to threaten because people just fall in line. They continue to expand. Ticketmaster has gotten into the ticket resale game so they can charge fees when the ticket is first sold and then additional fees on the resale of the same ticket. The live event experience has become increasingly out of reach for so many fans. One GAO study found that 27% of the ticket price was the fees. Recent study found that for some tickets, it's as high as 75% of face value. And we also know it affects service. As millions of Taylor Swift fans found out last fall, there are few consequences for failing to deliver the service. But Taylor Swift, I think it's important for our colleagues and all to note, is just one example. Whether it's Bruce Springsteen or BTS or Bad Bunny or in the past Pearl Jam or the Pixies, fans, artists, and venues are facing real issues with Live Nations. I'm hopeful this can be a constructive hearing. Purposes of hearing: 1, so the public can find out what's happening. Sometimes that on its own gets changed. Secondly, investigations are reportedly going on. We haven't had that confirmed out of the Justice Department. This is helpful for them. And the third reason is that our colleagues on a bipartisan basis can work together on legislation. Senator Blumenthal's been involved in this issue for many years, and we can do something, not just to strengthen our antitrust laws, which we must do generally, but also specifically in the ticketing industry when it comes to transparency and resale and the like. Restoring competition to our markets is about making sure that fans get fair prices and better service. Concert goers today should be able to have those same experiences I had when I was in high school, when it didn't cost very much to just be able to go see a band and remember it forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Lee of Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairwoman Klobuchar. I'm really looking forward to my ongoing service on the Antitrust Subcommittee, along with Senator Klobuchar as chair. To be honest, I had hoped, as of a few months ago, to get the gavel back, but once again, she's chair captain, and I'm on the bleachers. So it was nice.
Oh, you're a little more than that.
Nice of Taylor Swift to have written a song about this very situation. But all joking aside, this hearing for me is is not only about the latest ticketing disaster that has made headlines. My daughter Eliza might disagree, but there are much bigger issues involved than this one event, although that one event is not to be discounted and is itself significant. The ticketing market in the United States is a complex industry involving artists, agents, promoters, venues, primary and secondary ticketing companies, and of course fans, many of whom we see outside of our buildings today. As I was driving up this morning, I couldn't help but notice I had never seen more smiling and happy demonstrators than I saw today. I think Swifties have figured something out. They're very good at getting their message across. Their message has come across in many forms over the last couple of months, including a letter I received from a young woman named Erin Harding in Utah, a young woman who's only 16 years old. She sent me a letter and an accompanying PowerPoint presentation. I think Erin Harding has a bright future ahead of her, perhaps as an antitrust lawyer or perhaps in a number of other fields as well, but it's been an impressive response. We've got to remember that for those who follow antitrust policy, the ticketing space in the last few years has also offered a natural experiment for evaluating both the efficiency claims of merging parties and the federal government's efforts to protect competition using antitrust laws. Back in 2010, the Obama Justice Department, the Antitrust Division, concluded an investigation into the then proposed merger of Ticketmaster, the nation's largest and dominant ticketing provider, and Live Nation, the country's largest concert promoter. In a complaint alleging that the merger violated the Clayton Act, the department argued that it would eliminate recent but quickly growing head-to-head competition in the marketplace for ticketing services. However, instead of just stopping the merger, the Obama Justice Department in 2010 said that the department would approve it if and only if the parties agreed to a proposed consent decree. The consent decree that was entered into by Ticketmaster and Live Nation addressed two additional concerns. First, that the combination of the two companies would allow the merged firm to tie the provision of ticketing services and concert promotion. In other words, that Live Nation could force venues to use Ticketmaster in order to get concerts and vice versa. And second, that it might retaliate against venues that didn't comply with this arrangement. Now, Ticketmaster will tell you that the settlement agreement was something that they were willing readily to enter into. They weren't bothered by the consent decree at all, because this would, according to them, essentially be the functional equivalent of their offering the sleeves off of their vest. And that Ticketmaster and Live Nation readily agreed not to engage in behavior that the merged firm had no incentive and no intention of undertaking. And yet, here we are, almost 13 years later, faced with a flotilla of allegations and complaints that the merged entity has done exactly what it said would never happen. There are news reports that the Justice Department has opened a new investigation into Ticketmaster's conduct, but Congress has an important role to play here as well. While DOJ undoubtedly wants to know whether Ticketmaster is violating the consent decree, Congress should be asking whether the consent decree was the right decision in the first place. Was the divestiture sufficient to ensure competitive pressure on the combined entity of Ticketmaster and Live Nation? Were the behavioral remedies capable of preventing that very kind of abuse? If the allegations that we're likely to hear today are true, if they can be proven, that they raise very serious doubts about the sufficiency of the DOJ's efforts and arguably counsel in favor of a new approach going forward. With all that in mind, today is the perfect opportunity to do what this committee is supposed to do, exercise oversight over the executive branch's law enforcement efforts, and consider whether, to what extent, in what ways, new legislation, or perhaps just better enforcement of existing laws, might be needed to protect the American people. I'm glad that we're here today, and I look forward to hearing from each of our witnesses. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Lee. Let me welcome the 6 witnesses whom I'll introduce. Joe Berchtold serves as Live Nation Entertainment's president and CFO. In this role, Mr. Berchtold oversees finances the world's largest live entertainment and ticketing company. Prior to joining Live Nation, Mr. Berchtold was president of Technicolor Creative Services at Technicolor and a partner with McKinsey & Company, leading their West Coast media practice. Jack Grotzinger, co-founder and CEO of SeatGeek, mobile-focused ticketing platform. The company originally launched as an aggregator of resale ticket listings, but now operates as both the primary ticket outlet and secondary marketplace for sports teams and live event venues. Prior to co-founding SeatGeek, Mr. Grotzinger was an associate counsel at Bain & Company. Jerry Michaelson is the co-founder of Jam Productions of Chicago, a Chicago-based concert promotion agency and one of the largest independent producers of live concert entertainment in the country. This is a return trip for Mr. Michaelson. He testified before the Antitrust Subcommittee in February of 2009 at a hearing on the then pending merger of Ticketmaster and Live Nation. At the time, he warned us of any competitive effects of the merger could have, stating, quote, "It's my belief this merger is vertical integration on steroids," close quote. I look forward to hearing an update on his views. Sal Nuzzo, Senior Vice President of the James Madison Institute, RJMI, Tallahassee-based think tank focusing on free market economics in Florida. In that role, Mr. Nuzzo oversees JMI's policy operation, coalition building, and strategy development. His writings have been published in the Wall Street Journal, National Review, The Hill, and Newsweek. Kathleen Bradish serves as the American Antitrust Institute's Vice President for Legal Advocacy. Ms. Bradish, prior to joining AAI, worked as counsel for Cleary Gottlieb and as an attorney in the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division. While at the Department of Justice, she represented the Antitrust Division in trade issues, including leading the negotiations of competition chapters in the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement and in the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Clyde Lawrence is a leader of the band Lawrence and a musician, composer, and producer. In December, Mr. Lawrence wrote an op-ed in the New York Times titled, "Taylor Swift's Live Nation debacle is just the beginning." In it, Mr. Lawrence explained how Live Nation's market dominance negatively impacted artists like himself. I look forward to hearing his perspective today. After I swear in the witnesses, each will have 5 minutes to make an opening statement and then turn to senators' questions. As I mentioned, after I've administered the oath, I'll pass the gavel to Senator Klobuchar to preside over the remainder of the hearing. First, could all of the witnesses please stand to be sworn in? Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that all of the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. And before I ask Mr. Berchtold to give his opening statement, ceremonial handing of the gavel.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Berchtold.
Chair Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, Senators Klobuchar and Lee, and other members of the committee, I'm Joe Berchtold, President and Chief Financial Officer of Live Nation Entertainment. I thank you for the invitation to appear today to address these important issues in the live entertainment industry so we can together work to make things better. For almost 20 years, Live Nation has operated in the United States and around the world with an artist-first business model that is focused on helping put artists on stage and connecting them with their fans. We believe that the artist-fan connection is the foundation of the live entertainment industry, the source of nearly all commercial value, and the #1 thing that public policy should protect. Over this period, we have helped the industry grow rapidly. In 2022, live music was a $12 billion industry in the United States, 4 times what it was in 2005. To fuel this growth, Live Nation has invested billions of dollars funding artists globally, $9 billion in 2022 alone. Given our level of investment in artists, it is also critical for Live Nation to have the most effective platform possible for selling tickets. Since our 2010 merger with Ticketmaster, we have invested over $1 billion in capital to improve the Ticketmaster system. Much of this was on technologies to eliminate fraud and to get tickets to fans instead of ticket scalpers using bots, a prime example of which is our verified fan service. Today's Ticketmaster is best in class in conducting large on-sales, marketing concerts, preventing frauds, and getting tickets into the hands of real fans. I do want to take a moment to address some confusion about what Ticketmaster and other primary ticketing platforms do and don't do. Primary ticketing companies, including Ticketmaster, do not set ticket prices. We do not decide how many tickets go on sale and when, and we do not set service fees. Pricing and distribution strategies are determined by the artists and their teams. Service fees, even if they're called ticketing fees, are retained mainly by the venues, and their portion of the service fee that Ticketmaster retains has been falling steadily over time. This leads to the topic of today's hearing, competition in ticketing markets. We hear people say that the ticketing markets are less competitive today than they were at the time of the Live Nation Ticketmaster merger. That's simply not true. In 2009, the Department of Justice alleged that Ticketmaster's market share was over 80%. It's a different story today. The most obvious change is the emergence of the enormous secondary ticketing market, in which Ticketmaster has a modest market share and many strong competitors. But also in primary ticketing, the Ticketmaster of 2010 did not face the level of competition that we face today with new competitors highly capitalized, including SeatGeek, AEG's Access, and Eventbrite, along with established competitors including Tickets.com and Paciolan. Ticketmaster has lost, not gained, market share since the merger. And as I mentioned, today's competitive bidding process with numerous credible alternative ticketing companies resulting in getting less of the economic value in a ticketing contract every year. There are problems in the ticketing industry, problems we believe can and should be addressed through legislation. Many are the direct result of industrial-scale ticket scalping that goes on today. A $5 billion industry in concerts alone in the United States, fueled by practices that run counter to the interests of artists and their fans. The recent on-sale experience with Taylor Swift, one of the world's most popular artists, has highlighted the need to address these issues urgently. We knew bots would attack that on-sale and planned accordingly. We were then hit with 3 times the amount of bot traffic that we'd ever experienced. And for the first time in 400 verified fan on-sales, they came after our verified fan password servers as well. While the bots failed to penetrate our systems or acquire any tickets, the attack requires to slow down and even pause our sales. This is what led to a terrible consumer experience, which we deeply regret. We apologize to the fans. We apologize to Ms. Swift. We need to do better, and we will do better. Ticketmaster learned valuable lessons from this on-sale. In hindsight, there are several things we could have done better. And let me be clear that Ticketmaster accepts its responsibility as being the first line of defense against bots in our industry. It's an ever-escalating arms race. But in this forum where we're here to discuss public policy, we also need to recognize how industrial scalpers using bots and cyber attacks to unfairly gain tickets has contributed to this awful experience. There are many things we can and should accomplish together. We should enlarge the scope of the Bots Act and increase enforcement. We should enact categorical prohibitions on fraudulent ticket practices, including deceptive URLs and offering for sale tickets before they're on sale in the primary. We should mandate all-in pricing so that fans see the full cost of their tickets from the start. We share your goal of making live entertainment industry better for artists, teams, and fans alike, and it's in that spirit that I sit before you today, to work with you to make the fan experience better. I look forward to answering your questions.
Mr. Grotzinger.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, Senators Klobuchar and Lee, and members of the committee. My name is Jack Retzinger. I am the co-founder and CEO of CGeek. And like so many millions, I am a fan. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. Some of my happiest childhood memories are going to see Cleveland Crunch games with my dad. That's an indoor soccer team, seeing Cavs games with friends. My co-founders and I started CGeek because we believe profoundly in the power of live events, of these magical things that create incredible moments, and yet believe that the experience of actually buying tickets is very much the opposite. It's antiquated, ripe for innovation. I've spent the last 13 plus years working in this industry, and there are three things that are clear to me and are clear to many others who work in live entertainment. Number one, a lack of robust competition in our industry meaningfully stunts innovation, and consumers are who suffer. Number two, venues fear losing Live Nation concerts if they don't use Ticketmaster. And number three, the only way to restore competition in this industry is to break up Ticketmaster and Live Nation. Some quick background on SeatGeek. We started the company in 2009, and initially, as was mentioned, we were a search engine that allowed users to search across a lot of sites. The company evolved, we grew over time, and importantly to this discussion, in 2016, we entered the primary ticketing market. Throughout our evolution, we have maintained intense focus on the consumer. We've launched many industry-first features that make it easier and more affordable for fans to go to events. And I'm super proud of all of the work that we've done at SeatGeek, but I also recognize the ongoing challenges that face our industry, some of which have recently been front-page news. The best way to address those challenges is to ensure there is robust competition where businesses and consumers can select the best products and services based on their merits. That does not happen today. It does not happen because Live Nation controls the most popular entertainers in the world, routes most of the large tours, operates the ticketing systems, and even owns many of the venues. This power over the entire live entertainment industry allows Live Nation to maintain its monopolistic influence over the primary ticketing market. As long as Live Nation remains both the dominant concert promoter and ticketer of major venues in the US, the industry will continue to lack competition and struggle. As discussed, Live Nation Entertainment is the product of the 2010 merger of Ticketmaster and Live Nation. And as was also mentioned, they entered into a consent decree, which banned Ticketmaster from threatening or retaliating against venues by withholding Live Nation concerts. That did not work. It has not worked at all. The DOJ's 2009 investigation confirmed that Live Nation had violated the consent decree repeatedly, almost since its inception. The DOJ identified numerous examples of Live Nation threatening and retaliating against venues that did not contract with Ticketmaster. Today, Ticketmaster's estimated market share is over 70% of the US primary ticketing market. Ticketmaster is the primary ticketing provider for more than 80% of the NBA, NHL, and NFL teams. Live Nation is also the largest promoter of major concerts in the world, promoting more than 73% of the top 25 tours in the US in 2021. It is no mystery why no other company has significantly penetrated the primary ticketing market. Major venues in the US know that if they move their primary ticketing business from Ticketmaster, they risk losing revenue they earn from Live Nation concerts. They know this because Live Nation has told them so, directly and indirectly, through its public pronouncements, private communications, and subsequent retaliation against venues that have signed deals with a competitor. The DOJ found that as a consequence of Live Nation's conduct, quote, venues throughout the United States have come to expect that refusing to contract with Ticketmaster will result in the venue receiving fewer Live Nation concerts or none at all, unquote. Our industry provides a cautionary tale about how behavioral remedies cannot solve the problems inherent in an anti-competitive merger. The only effective remedy now is a structural one, the dissolution of the common ownership of Ticketmaster and Live Nation. To improve our industry, we must restore competition. At SeatGeek, we deeply care about the live event industry and believe it's time to give fans, teams, artists, and venues alike the choices they deserve. It's a privilege to be included in this discussion. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grotzinger. And next up, we have with us Mr. Michaelson. Thank you. And thank you for your work you do with the Palace in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Thank you, Senator. Talk on. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, Senator Klobuchar, and Senator Lee, along with all the other members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, for allowing me to appear before you today. I'm here to speak on behalf of my colleagues, fellow promoters, and most importantly, the concert fans. My appearance before you is based on my 50 years of experience in the live entertainment industry. For the record, my name is Jerry Michaelson, CEO and president of Jam Productions, a company that has produced and promoted events since 1972. As a primer for those who may not know, let me briefly talk about the job of promoters. We work with agents and managers to route tours into markets across the country. We make guaranteed payment to artists, contract with the venue to hold the event, market the show, put tickets on sale, and produce the show. We pay all the costs and assume all the risks. When Live Nation loses money on a concert, they can make up for that with operating income from ticketing and sponsorships. We can't do that. We don't have those. Pepsi doesn't earn money from Coke, but our competitor, Live Nation, earns money from selling tickets to our concerts. In 2009, I appeared in front of the committee to testify about the proposed merger of Live Nation and Ticketmaster. At that hearing, I stated the unification of these two Goliaths would create a business with extraordinary market power and clout unlike any that I've ever seen in my lifetime. I testified that if this merger was allowed to proceed, the combined entity would have the ability to suppress or eliminate competition in many segments of the industry. Today, we know with certainty that this merger is vertical integration on steroids, using dominance in one market to expand its power and dominance in another, cutting out the competition and harming the consumers. From my vantage point, the arena-level concerts used to be Jam's most profitable segment of the business because that's where we earned our money. In 1996, Jam produced 100 concerts in arenas, but in 2011, 1 year after the merger, that decreased to 46 concerts. And in 2022, we only produced 14 arena concerts. Live Nation went after the arena business, and they succeeded in driving us and other independent promoters out of that sector. Live Nation effectively eliminated competition for indoor arena shows by utilizing the following methods: purchasing national indoor tours in arenas and for their outdoor amphitheaters, threatening financial penalties on a tour deal if the artist wanted to work for Jam, paying a band 100% or more of the gross ticket sales, and Live Nation managed artists typically only perform for Live Nation promoted shows at the arena level. Now Live Nation is going after music theaters and clubs of all sizes in an effort to control the entire live music industry from the top to the bottom. From 2010 to 2021, Live Nation added 61 theaters and 41 clubs to their already large arsenal of venues. The near complete domination of arenas because of the merger could soon happen in theaters and clubs in every community in the country. On a 2016 Live Nation earnings call, Michael Rapino, their president and CEO, said one of the company's biggest goals was to convince artists to agree to integrate the primary and secondary ticket markets to grow Live Nation's share. Rapino stated, and I quote, "Artists, the more they get comfortable with seeing primary and secondary together, our market share grows." With that statement, Rapino acknowledged that they are not serving artists, they are serving themselves. There are two antitrust decisions I'd like to bring to your attention where vertical integration played a prominent role in restricting competition. The 1948 Supreme Court decision in the U.S. versus Paramount led to the abolishment of block booking and forced the movie studios to sell off their theater chains. An excerpt from the Eastman Kodak case states, "The court has held many times that power gained through some advantage can give rise to liability if a seller exploits his dominant position in the market to expand his empire into the next." Every time that Live Nation or Ticketmaster blames anybody else for the significant issues and increasingly high fees, remember that many times they are the venue, the promoter, and the manager of that artist. By controlling ticketing and promotion, the artist management company, they're choking off competition that would offer an alternative to the broken system we see today. This was most acutely seen in Taylor Swift, and it's playing out across the live music industry every day and generating fan outrage and despair. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michaelson. Next up, Mr. Nuzzo.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, I would like to thank you for the honor and the opportunity to appear before you this morning. My name is Sal Nuzzo, and I serve on the policy team at the James Madison Institute in Tallahassee, Florida. We are a nonprofit economic policy think tank that focuses on the policy issues impacting Florida's 22 million residents. Fresh out of college and starting a career in policy, I dreamt of one day testifying before the United States Senate on an issue of profound importance, maybe international monetary policy or perhaps a Supreme Court nomination. But as my 14 and 13-year-old daughters informed me last night, Dad, nothing you speak on in your career will be as important as what you say today. Don't mess this up. So here we go. Florida is home to 13 major sports teams, 15 Major League Baseball spring training facilities, NASCAR, F1, the PGA, LPGA, college, and numerous other sports venues. I say that because most of those venues serve as concert sites when they're not in use during their respective seasons. In Florida, sports and live entertainment is a $6.5 billion market, a sizable share of the nation's $133 billion economic impact in this area. So this issue is important to Floridians, not just with respect to primary ticketing, but also the secondary ticket market, which I would like to open with. I'd like to offer our perspective by way of a brief analogy. Because I'm an employee of a nonprofit organization, I drive a 15-year-old Volvo with 200,000 miles on it. God bless the Swedes. I purchased it from a private seller in 2015, and much to my kids' dismay, it's still going strong. Volvo didn't place a single restriction on the automobile when I purchased it, and if and when I decide to sell it, they'll likely have no role in the transaction. In fact, I don't think they have a clue what's happened to the car since it left their dealership. This is true for just about every auto manufacturer. Consequently, our auto market is a robust, thriving, and diverse industry largely adhering to the forces of supply and demand. The same could be the case for the market governing the selling, marketing, and resale of tickets to sports, competitions, and concerts. It could be, but it has not occurred. There is, as we've spoken about, one dominant market player approaching 80% of the primary market. This does allow them the ability to leverage that dominance through service fees, exclusivity requirements, and other practices that are ultimately borne by consumers. At its core, a debate is occurring over what a person actually obtains when they purchase a ticket. Some would argue that the purchaser is simply leasing or renting a space in a venue, and that the lease is subject to terms and conditions. In our opinion, that logic rests on a misguided assumption that the commodity is the venue. Ask anyone attending a Jaguars game, or a Harry Styles concert for that matter, where they're going, and they'll reply, I'm going to the Jags game, or I'm going to take my daughters to see Harry Styles. They would not reply with, oh, I'm going to TIAA Bank Field this afternoon, or just taking my kids to Amway Arena tonight. The stadium may have a lifespan of 50 years, but an individual purchases a commodity with a much more limited lifespan, a couple of hours. This distinction, in our opinion, is vital to the debate over the issues within the event ticketing space. Over the last several years, we've heard the term consumer welfare standard uttered much more frequently. Questions over whether the standard is still applicable in today's innovation economy, whether it should be replaced with some other form of subjective measure, and in the age of tech platforms, what consumer welfare even means. I would ask you all today, as we conduct this hearing, to set that principle aside. In this area, we would contend that consumer welfare is very clearly defined and reflective of the issues and challenges within this industry. Those representing the dominant player in the market would contend that their growth has allowed them to innovate and make advances that greatly benefit consumers. A few million Taylor Swift fans would respond, this is why we can't have nice things. To be clear, from our perspective, the issue isn't the Taylor Swift crash per se. That merely revealed how a lack of competition over time has corroded innovation and distorted the market. I would ask, suppose a robust, vibrant, and competitive market for ticketing had been allowed to evolve and innovate over the last 20 years. Would the Taylor Swift crash have occurred? It's a hypothetical, of course, but absolutely one worth considering. I will conclude my remarks with a call to you as policymakers. On this topic, in this arena, consumer welfare is very clear to define, and there are actual harms to consumers from anti-competitive practices. Thank you to all, and I appreciate the opportunity to be before you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nuzzo. And next up, Ms. Bradish.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, Senators Klobuchar and Lee, and members of the committee. It is an honor to be here today to lend the American Antitrust Institute's perspective to the issue of competition in live entertainment. AAI applauds Senate lawmakers for turning their attention to a serious competition issue that hurts concertgoers, artists, and smaller competitors across the live entertainment industry. There are a few major points and policy recommendations that I would like to highlight today. First, Live Nation Ticketmaster is an example of, on one hand, a very traditional monopoly in the mode of Standard Oil, and on the other, a 21st century digital player, like other online platforms, dominating an ever-widening swath of its industry. Its dominance in markets up and down the live entertainment supply chain creates the incentive and the ability to limit competition to protect its market position. On the concert side, this includes excluding smaller or independent concert promoters and venues. In digital ticketing, this includes excluding ticket resellers and brokers who provide important competition via the secondary ticketing market. Customers pay the price for these monopolistic acts with higher ticket prices and fees, lower quality, less choice, and less innovation. Artists who lack the blockbuster power of a Swift or a Springsteen lose out. Smaller rivals in the supply chain also lose out. Second, we should learn from the failure of the conduct remedies that were a condition of the DOJ's clearance of the 2010 merger of Live Nation and Ticketmaster. A lengthy DOJ investigation concluded in 2020 that Live Nation Ticketmaster repeatedly violated the requirements of the consent decree. Unfortunately, rather than seeking an effective structural remedy, DOJ simply amended some of the language in the consent decree and extended the decree for another 5.5 years. The amended decree did nothing to change Live Nation Ticketmaster's anti-competitive incentives. This current DOJ has recognized the ineffectiveness of behavioral remedies that run counter to a company's incentives. DOJ should pursue new enforcement action to obtain effective structural relief. This could be through a consummated merger challenge under Section 7 of the Clayton Act or a monopolization case under Section 2 of the Sherman Act. Separating ticketing from promotion and venues would eliminate the incentives to stifle competition. And reducing the market share of Ticketmaster through spin-offs would address Ticketmaster's incentives to limit competition in secondary ticketing. Protecting consumers, artists, and smaller rivals from Live Nation Ticketmaster's harmful conduct will require multiple policy tools, including strong antitrust enforcement against Live Nation Ticketmaster and legislative action. AAI urges enforcers and lawmakers to consider 3 major features of a multi-pronged approach to the Live Nation Ticketmaster monopoly problem. First, consider standards that enable the agencies to challenge vertical mergers as effectively as horizontal mergers. The incipiency standard in Section 7 of the Clayton Act is designed to prevent all mergers that may enhance market power and lead to anti-competitive effects. We currently have a structural presumption for horizontal mergers. We badly need a presumption for vertical mergers, either through legislative action or new antitrust guidelines that get adopted by the courts. Second, support more vigorous antitrust enforcement with legislation designed to strengthen and clarify the U.S. antitrust laws. Senator Klobuchar's proposed Competition and Antitrust Law Enforcement Reform Act is a leading example. The bill would, among other things, update legal standards for mergers and strengthen the standard for prohibiting exclusionary conduct by dominant firms. Such reforms would reduce the formidable burdens on the government for bringing monopolization and merger cases. Finally, consider the merits of an oversight regime to facilitate access to and transparency in ticketing. Dominant digital platforms can engage in practices designed to self-preference, such as steering music fans to Ticketmaster's proprietary ticketing services. Solutions to these problems may well require establishing rules of the road or codes of conduct for digital ticketing platforms. Such legislation has been proposed at both the state and federal level. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And last but not least is Clyde Lawrence of the band Lawrence. And I will say, looking at your testimony ahead of time, Mr. Lawrence, I particularly enjoyed the line that perhaps you'll repeat, that while you are so proud of your band, we're not artists yet on the level of acts like Taylor Swift or Bruce Springsteen, though we do hope one day to be big enough to crash a ticketing website. With that, I turn it over to you, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you. I hope it'll get as big a laugh when I say it than as when you just did. Good morning, Senators, and thank you for inviting us today to the most unique gig we've had in years. My name is Clyde Lawrence, and this is Jordan Cohen. We are two of the 8 members of Lawrence, a soul pop band from New York City. Before telling you more about who we are, it's important to clarify who we're not. We're not lawyers or economists with expertise in antitrust policy. And as Senator Klobuchar said, we're also not artists on the level of acts like Taylor Swift or Bruce Springsteen, though we do hope to one day be big enough to crash a ticketing website. What we are, however, are seasoned artists who have toured extensively over the last 7 years, starting with empty bars and working our way up to headlining sold-out shows for thousands of people and seeing our music chart on Top 40 radio. While we became musicians because of our passion for making music, we realized early on that we needed to embrace the entrepreneurial aspects of pursuing careers as artists. Ever since we started touring, we've tried to be vocal about the lopsided deal mechanics we were facing, even including the lyric, "Live Nation is a monopoly," in our latest album. Whether or not it meets the legal definition of a monopoly is someone else's call to make. We're here just to tell you what we've observed. While Jordan and I discussed those dynamics in depth in our written testimony, most of the issues we face stem from the fact that Live Nation Ticketmaster often acts as 3 things at the same time: the promoter, the venue, and the ticketing company. Let's imagine we just played a sold-out show at a venue Live Nation owns and operates. When an artist plays these venues, they're required to use Live Nation as the promoter. Far from simply advertising, the promoter coordinates and pays the upfront costs to put together a concert, such as renting and staffing a venue and striking a deal with the performer. Since both our pay and theirs is a share of the show's profits, we should be true partners, aligned in our incentives. Keep costs low while ensuring the best fan experience. But with Live Nation not only acting as the promoter, but also as the owner and or operator of the venue, it seriously complicates these incentives. At the end of the show, costs will have eaten into most of the money made that evening, and due to Live Nation's control across the industry, we have practically no leverage in negotiating them. If they want to take 10% of the revenues and call it a facility fee, they can and have. If they want to charge $30,000 for the house nut, they can and have. And if they want to charge us $250 for a stack of 10 clean towels, they can and have. Once these costs, some of which went to Live Nation subsidiaries, are taken into account, the remainder is split between Live Nation and the band. In a world where the promoter and the venue are not affiliated with each other, we can trust that the promoter will look to get the best deal from the venue. However, in this case, the promoter and the venue are part of the same corporate entity, so these line items are essentially Live Nation negotiating to pay itself. Does that seem fair? The tickets were listed at $30, and our pay ended up shaking out to about $12 of each ticket. But in this hypothetical show, the fan did not pay $30 for that ticket. The fan paid $42 because Ticketmaster tacked on a 40% fee. And for the record, we've had them go as high as 82%. As with promotion, if an artist plays at a Live Nation venue, the artist has no choice but to have the show ticketed by Ticketmaster. And to be clear, we have absolutely zero say or visibility in how much these fees will be. We find out the same way as everyone else by logging on to Ticketmaster once the show already goes on sale. And in case you're wondering, no, we, the artists, do not get a cent of that fee. So of the $42 a fan spent on a ticket, we receive $12. But whereas Live Nation's costs were already covered at this point in the calculation, we still need to pay for our touring costs. In our case, roughly 50% of our earnings is used to cover expenses. So that leaves us with $6 for an 8-piece band, pre-tax, and we also have to pay our own health insurance. To be fair, many of the issues we've addressed here are not exclusive to Live Nation Ticketmaster, and we've had a number of positive experiences with parts of Live Nation. Their venues are often filled with hardworking and passionate people, and most importantly, we love that all of their venues have one consistent Wi-Fi network and password. That one's a real game changer. Jokes aside, we truly do not see Live Nation as the enemy. They're just the largest player in a game that feels stacked against us as artists, and often our fans as well. Ultimately, when looking at the current state of the industry, we're left with lots of questions. Why is it that all of Live Nation's costs get recouped before the show hits its profit point, yet ours, the artists, don't? Why is there so little transparency as to what line items such as facility fees actually go towards? Why is it standard for Live Nation to take a 20% commission on our merchandise sales while we never receive a cent of their ancillary revenues like concessions, alcohol, and parking? Finally, why is Live Nation allowed to freely set exorbitantly high ticket fees without any transparency or input, while in other industries the government has mandated caps on various types of junk fees? We look forward to seeing these questions get some answers. Thank you for your time, and we hope to see some of you at one of our band's concerts. If you'd like to come, let me know, and I'll throw you on the guest list to help you avoid the ticket fees.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence. I think we're willing to pay, but we really appreciate your testimony.
It's on us.
Okay. With that, I'm going to turn it over for the first round of questions to our chair, Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar. Mr. Lawrence, I'm going to stick with you for a minute because you made it clear that you do not set the ticket price. And Mr. Berchtold said he doesn't have anything to do with the ticket price. Who does set the ticket price?
That's an excellent question. That was actually the thing I was most surprised to hear in Mr. Berchtold's speech, because we definitely have absolutely no say. And if we actually ask the venues in advance, which we often do, they say that's a Ticketmaster thing. So the fees, I mean, we actually do set, the ticket prices, the base price. The artist does have a say in setting for sure. But those added Ticketmaster service fees, we have absolutely no say. And the venues claim that it's a Ticketmaster
Mr. Berchtold, you want to add anything to that?
Thank you. Yes, as Mr. Lawrence said, the band sets the ticket price. The service fee level is set by the venue.
And you control the venue. Do you not?
Of approximately
Live Nation?
Of approximately 4,000 venues in the United States per Pollstar, Live Nation operates approximately 200, so roughly 5% of the venues in the country.
Are they the biggest?
No, sir. They're generally not the biggest. The biggest tend to be the sports venues, the arenas, the stadiums controlled by the sports teams or the owners of the sports teams.
Mr. Grotzinger, you had an experience at Barclays, did you not, in terms of an opportunity for your company to take over a venue that had been controlled by Ticketmaster? How did that work?
The New York Times reported a few weeks ago how once we took over ticketing for the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, the Barclays Center saw a marked decrease in the number of concerts from Live Nation that were sent to that venue versus historical averages. So earlier last year, the Barclays Center management came to us and said, we'd like to keep using you for ticketing our basketball, but we want to be able to use Ticketmaster to ticket concerts. And we looked into it and couldn't get the economics to work, so we said to them, listen, let's just, part ways amicably, and we did.
So they used their power of the marketplace to diminish the number of acts at that venue, and the venue decided they had to go back to Ticketmaster.
There was certainly, as Pollstar public data shows, a marked increase in the number of shows Live Nation played at that venue after the venue decided to move away from Ticketmaster.
Mr. Berchtold, is that true?
I believe, Senator, that what the New York Times indicated was that another venue opened in the marketplace, So you now had two venues vying for the shows that weren't going to Madison Square Garden, and that the number of shows going to Barclays from all the major promoters went down as a result of that increased competition. I have not heard of any allegations that we changed in any way our booking of concerts for that venue. It's a matter that I watch very closely given the profile of the New York market. I understand every decision about every show, where it was placed and why. We have records determining that in no cases was there any retaliation against Barclays in the placement of shows.
Mr. Grotzinger, last word on Barclays?
Yep, I don't have more to add specifically on retaliation there. I would note that the DOJ report in 2019 found numerous instances of Live Nation threatening and retaliating against venues once they had moved away from Ticketmaster. In one case, the Live Nation president told the venue that they would, quote unquote, go nuclear if they left. So the threat is real. It's been documented. It happens across many venues.
Mr. Michaelson, Mr. Berchtold defended his market position in one element, saying it was a battle of the bots. Have you run into that phenomena?
Ticketing companies, one of the things they're supposed to do is have solutions to bots. And for the leading ticket company not to be able to handle bots is, for me, pretty an unbelievable statement. But you can't blame bots for what happened to Taylor Swift. There's more to that story that you're not hearing.
Ms. Bradish, you probably heard Mr. Berchtold's suggestions or read in his testimony 3 things he thinks need to be done, which included all-in pricing on the tickets, fighting deceptive URLs as an example, and creating a civil action under the Bots Act. Any reaction from you to those suggestions?
Well, none of those suggestions go to the core of what we've been talking about today, which is the antitrust problem. The fact that Live Nation Ticketmaster, because of its market power, has the incentive to do things to exclude competition in all of its markets up and down the supply chain for live entertainment. So I appreciate those suggestions. Many of them may be good ideas, but it does not change the fact that Live Nation Ticketmaster is a monopoly and will act because that's its incentive to exclude competition.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin. Next up, Senator Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Bradish, I'd like to start with you. Back in 2010, the antitrust complaint filed by the Department of Justice against the proposed merger between Ticketmaster and Live Nation alleged, among other things, that Ticketmaster had at the time an 83% market share, with no competitor, no single competitor, having more than 4% of the market. It also alleged that Live Nation, for its part, was Ticketmaster's biggest customer and was the leading concert promoter at the time, of course. It also alleged that Live Nation had begun competing directly with Ticketmaster for ticketing services, rising over a very short period of time to 16% of the market share in just 2 months, kind of a meteoric rise. So with that in mind, why, in your view, did the Department of Justice settle what seems to be a strong case that appears to involve the elimination of head-to-head competition with a monopolist? And would you agree that what we have here is not a shortcoming necessarily of our antitrust laws, but error, perhaps gross negligence in enforcing them?
Well, I think that there are 2 elements to why the DOJ would take a consent decree rather than pursue a case in court. Obviously, a case in court involves risk, and the fact is that to pursue a vertical merger in court, and recent experience backs that up, is difficult. It's very difficult for DOJ to win a vertical merger
Meaning
case.
post Dr. Miles?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. So that it's hard, given the current state of the law, for DOJ to pursue a vertical merger case. So that will make them, in many cases, hesitant to do that.
Right.
The second issue, I think, that comes up here is the need for witnesses in a court case. And in in a situation where there's a pervasive fear of the dominant firm, where venues and promoters and other independent rivals will potentially suffer consequences, and history since then has suggested that's the case, they would have to testify in court. And to get someone to take that risk is not an easy ask.
The point about Dr. Miles and Legion is interesting, although, if I'm not mistaken, they pitched this as a horizontal merger, didn't they? And didn't the complaint identify it as a horizontal, not a vertical?
Well, there's a horizontal component as well as a vertical component. The conduct remedy part of it clearly goes to the vertical part of the issue.
Now, the consent decree includes a divestiture and also prohibitions on tying the ticketing services and the concert promotion. You want to say anything about how those have worked in practice and why?
Well, obviously, the investigation that culminated in the 2020 modification to the consent decree showed that, in fact, this was repeatedly violated. The DOJ described 6 instances, but also pointed to a pervasive environment of fear of retaliation. And as a result, it shows that when a company has incentives to act in a particular way, a consent decree isn't necessarily going to stop them from doing that.
Right. Mr. Berchtold, do you want to respond?
Yes, I absolutely acknowledge, Senator, that the Department of Justice alleged 6 issues in 2019, which led to our decision with them to extend the consent decree. We did not feel it made sense to be seen as defending the theories of retaliation or threats. It's not our business practice. It goes against our fundamental focus on alignment with the artist, the idea that we would ever put our interest ahead of theirs. So we were comfortable extending the consent decree. As she mentioned, there were several things that changed because we had different interpretations. And one of the things that we've done is in instances where venues are seeking to tie in a ticketing and a concert agreement into an overall deal, we have eliminated those so that there can't be any instance where there's the perception of threats or retaliation associated with that bundling done at the venue's request. So we've simply eliminated that from our service set, along with the establishment of monitors to make sure that any venue employee or others could confidentially report any issues.
Is it accurate to say that at a minimum, that Live Nation at a minimum was a motivated and capable, potentially, if not likely, competitor?
I'm sorry,
at the time of the merger, is it accurate to say that at the time of the merger, Live Nation was an emerging, nascent competitor and likely a very capable potential competitor?
I would say, Senator, that Live Nation at the time was finding that it was very difficult to build its own ticketing system, that one of the driving motivations to the Ticketmaster merger was the feeling that it wasn't going to successfully build its own system, and it sought to find one that could more effectively serve its needs of selling tickets for fans.
Yeah, I'm out of time, but they had sold 6 million tickets, and they did rise to a pretty prominent position in the marketplace in 2 months. So that's not nothing. We'll get to that later. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll start with you, Ms. Bradish. As a former antitrust attorney who studied these markets, do you agree that the ticketing market was more competitive when Ticketmaster was competing with Live Nation as separate companies?
Certainly, and especially where you have a potential new entrant that's showing the ability to increase its market share rapidly and with great success. That's precisely the kind of pressure that you would want to have on a dominant player to make sure that they act in a competitive fashion. The loss of that is the loss of competition.
Exactly. Mr. Berchtold, we've heard serious concerns from artists, promoters, venues that Live Nation's dominance in the concert tour promotion can pressure venues to use Ticketmaster's primary ticketing service exclusively. How else would you explain the fact that Ticketmaster has 80% of major venues contracts in the U.S.?
It is absolutely our policy to not pressure, threaten, or retaliate against venues by using content as part of the ticketing discussion.
Mr. Michaelson, have you seen Live Nation leveraging its power as the leading concert promoter to pressure venues to use Ticketmaster for primary ticketing? How are they able to do that?
When speaking with people that either own or manage venues, their biggest fear is if they leave Ticketmaster, they will lose content. So whether it's said or not, it's implied that if I don't use Ticketmaster, I am not gonna get all the shows that I would like to have.
Get it?
And by the way, if you look at the difference between the Target Center in Minneapolis and the Xcel Energy Center in St. Paul, the Target Center is ticketed by Access. The Xcel Energy Center is ticketed by Ticketmaster. Look at the number of shows that play Xcel, and you'll see they far exceed the number of shows that play Target. And when you look at and break it down a little farther, you'll see that most of the shows that play Xcel are Live Nation shows, and they bring very few to the access-controlled venue, the Target Center.
Okay, thanks for that local reference. Mr. Berchtold, one way that Live Nation eliminates competitive pressures by locking venues into multi-year contracts, whether they 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. If you've tied up 80% of major concert venues with multi-year contracts, where is there room for one of your competitors to get in the door?
Yes, Senator. First, I would note that the 80% reference, I believe, is from a 2008 Department of Justice study, and we believe that our market share is substantially lower than that.
How much lower?
We would, variety of ways of estimating the market share in the industry, depending on what you include. We believe our market share will be somewhere between the 50 and 60% range.
Keep going.
Yes, I will absolutely acknowledge that it is the standard practice of venues in the United States who own ticketing rights to maximize the value of the ticketing rights they own by having long-term exclusive agreements with primary ticketing companies. Those ticketing contracts tend to last 3 to 5 years on average. I would note a very specific indication of the high level of competitiveness is first that with almost every contract renewal we have over the past decade, more of the money gets accrued to the venues as opposed to the primary ticketing provider, which would be one indicator of a very competitive marketplace. Secondly, I would note the success that CGeek had between 2018 and 2022, adding roughly 15% of the NFL and the NBA teams as primary ticketing clients, showed the level of movement of these clients.
Okay, Ms. Bradish, did these type of exclusive contracts, did they shut out competitors? To me, like, if you can't go to anyone else, what are you going to do?
Exactly. And I think it's a standard given in antitrust law that the longer the exclusivity in a contract, the greater the risk of a competitive effect. And the fact that they're able to get this length of contract indicates something about their market power. So, of course, it makes it much harder for particularly a newer entrant to get into the market if everybody is already tied up.
And Mr. Grotzinger, do you think that, to go to another topic, that Live Nation's concert promotion business, the fact that they're combined, has made it harder for you to compete for primary ticketing with Ticketmaster?
Yeah, absolutely, it has. Typically, we'll go to a prospective client, we will show them our technology, they'll get excited about how it's gonna make the experience better for their fans and allow them to run their business better. And then they'll start to think about the concert threat, and they'll talk, and discussions will often close at that point because they've heard or been explicitly threatened in a way that they know they will lose concerts if they move away from Ticketmaster. And one other thing I'd note that's, I think, particularly scary on that last topic is in response to some of the oversight and poking that has happened recently, we've seen Ticketmaster moving from 5 years, which used to be the standard length for a contract in our industry to 10 in many cases. They're trying to lock things down so that if there is more pressure, they've at least signed a lot of these decade-long deals. So there's not a lot of time. If we want competition in this industry, it is already going to be very hard to change. Longer contracts make that even harder, and that is what they've been pushing for recently.
Exactly. Last, Mr. Lawrence, what was the amount you said, the percentage of your tickets, some of the highest ones you've had recently that were fees?
Typically with Ticketmaster, we'll see a 40%-ish or closer to 50% fee added on top. We have seen really outlandish numbers, like we had a show last spring where there was an 82% fee on top of the base price. And again, we have no say or we don't even know what it's going to be until it goes on sale.
Mr. Berkdog, you heard Mr. Lawrence. With Ticketmaster's market power, which we all know exists, we'd be kidding ourselves if we said it didn't exist. Why haven't you done more to reduce fees?
As I noted in my comments, Senator, the fees are set by the venues. The Live Nation venues have fees that are consistent with the other venues in the marketplace and cover the cost of the operation of those venues.
Mr. Lawrence wants to reply.
We definitely ask venues before almost every show, what's the ticket fee going to be, both venues that Live Nation owns and ones that they just operate. And they always certainly don't take responsibility for the fees. So I don't know who is doing the fees, but we ask that question to the venues and they say, not only do we not choose what it is, we don't even know what it is. We can't even tell you what it's going to be. So I don't know where the answer lies, but no one's taking responsibility.
Last word, Ms. Bradish. Transparency would be helpful to know what the fees are. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
The market can't work well without transparency.
That's clearly there isn't transparency when no one knows who sets the fees.
Yes.
Okay, with that, Senator Cornyn.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all the witnesses being here, and this obviously is a concerning status quo. I just want to reflect a couple of years back during the height of the pandemic, we wondered whether many of these venues would survive, including in my state in Texas. And it's great to see that the work that Congress did with Save Our Stages and other support that Senator Klobuchar and I led had a positive impact on preserving many of these, especially smaller venues, and making it possible for many of the small businesses, which, Mr. Lawrence, I guess you would qualify as a small business, can continue to provide entertainment in these venues. I think what we've heard today does cry out for some response by Congress, but candidly, I'm not sure that the antitrust laws are the best tool in our toolbox, but that's something that we'll be talking more about in the near future. Mr. Berktold, I'm intrigued by a couple of your statements. You said that you have an artist-first business model, and then you had later said you would never put your interests ahead of theirs. Is that your testimony?
Yes, Senator, that is the approach of our business. Culturally, we believe that it's all about getting that artist on stage, letting them connect with their fans, and we believe if we support that and consistently act that way, then we will have a long and successful business working with artists and providing them services.
I guess without the artists, you would not have a business.
That's correct, sir.
Mr. Lawrence, has that been your experience, that Live Nation never puts their interests ahead of the artists and that they have an artist-first business model?
I think generally when we show up to play a show, the people that work for Live Nation at the venue absolutely, try to be partners to us in putting on the best concert. I think that the places where sometimes maybe you could feel like it's not artist first is just in the structure of the way some of the deals with the artists, when you look at the settlement sheet at the end of the night, where which breaks down who gets paid what, some of those line items where we have no say in setting any of the prices of those things, yet some of them are Live Nation directly setting the price for things that they are paying to other entities that they might own, which directly impacts the profit pool from which the artist's pay is being derived. those are the moments where I wouldn't say it's not artists first. I mean, who's to say? But like, those are the moments where it feels like we're not truly aligned in our incentives.
Well, for your band to make $6 out of a $42 ticket price,
Yeah, that doesn't feel great.
doesn't strike me as artist first.
I would agree with that.
Mr. Berchtold, you talked about how few venues that Live Nation actually owns, but the truth is that you have these, I think you alluded to this, you have these long-term exclusive rights contracts with many venues that you don't actually own, or that you have some sort of partial ownership where you have effective, at least contractual control over those venues. Is that correct?
Yeah, Senator, if I could differentiate on the ticketing side and the ticketing contracts as opposed to on the promotion side. So on the promotion side of the business, which Senator Klobuchar was asking about, there are roughly 4,000 venues in the United States. Roughly 200 of them we operate, often don't own the underlying business, but operate the buildings. And then we have roughly 40 more buildings with which we have an exclusive promoter relationship. So that's a very small portion of the market for venues.
So whether or not you actually own the venue, you do have effective influence and maybe in some cases outright control over what the venue charges in terms of the ticket price, correct?
In roughly 240 buildings, or 5 or 6% of the markets are yes.
Mr. Michaelson, why is it so hard for the average consumer to get access to tickets, and who benefits from less consumer access? Is it not the artist, I assume?
That's a good question, Senator. Let's take the Taylor Swift fiasco as an example. The fans had to sign up through verified fan to be able to even buy a ticket. Ticketmaster knew that the demand was enormous, bigger, larger than most any other show. And when they set the tickets up for sale, there's two ways you can do that. You can set the tickets so that they are best available, which means that you'll sell more tickets because the fans don't have a choice, or you can do pick a seat, where it slows the process down. The process, when it's slowed down, increases the money that Ticketmaster makes because they make money on fees, and as the ticket prices go up due to dynamically priced tickets, Ticketmaster makes more to that. So it's to their advantage to slow the process down and to do pick a seat so that it created the frenzy that drove the prices up, which again, Ticketmaster's getting a percentage of that fee. And the higher the ticket price, the higher the fee. So I think that it was driven by the corporate bottom line in the Taylor Swift fiasco, Ticketmaster's bottom line.
I see my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Cornyn. Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar. Let me start off by offering a Rhode Island welcome to Mr. Lawrence.
Yeah, 7 out of the 8 members of our band went to Brown University, so we have a lot of Rhode Island pride.
That's pretty impressive. What were your favorite venues?
We played at a local venue called AS220 a bunch, but honestly, we mostly played at like house parties on campus. That was kind of where we got our start. We also played recently a bunch at Fett Music Hall.
Well, AS220 is a great organization, and I'm proud to have you in the middle of this as a group that emerged from our terrific Brown University.
Thank you.
You mentioned in your testimony today that when artists like you play a Live Nation venue, you typically are also required to use Ticketmaster and a Live Nation-owned promoter. If that were not the expectation, what would the difference, you think, be for your band and your fans?
Well, if we had the ability to weigh different offers, then we would just be able to see a more apples-to-apples comparison of what kind of deals we could get in a given venue. But you're correct in saying that, yes, when we pick a given venue, if it's a venue that Live Nation is either the exclusive promoter or the operator or the owner of, there's no opportunity but to just receive a deal that we have no ability to negotiate from Live Nation. And yes, the tickets have to be ticketed by Ticketmaster. There's it would be great to be able to find out, oh, if it was this ticketing company, it might be a different fee. Or I know Mr. Berchtold is saying that the venue sets the fee, which has not been our experience. But, ideally we'd be able to see, if it was this company, it would be this or whatever.
Say a little bit more about how that has not been your experience.
It's 100% not been our experience. Yeah, there's literally not been a single time in our career when we've played at a Live Nation venue where we had any opportunity to not have Live Nation be the promoter or not have Ticketmaster be the ticketing company.
Have you heard of any other artists who've been able to figure out a way around that? Or do you think that all artists are up against the same wall that you've described of inevitability?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, no one's had a different experience than me. I know at the highest levels of playing like stadiums or arenas, there might be an opportunity to have a certain promoter come in and do that arena, but that's not my area in terms of.
In time, Mr. Lawrence, in time.
Yeah, hopefully.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate you being here, and thank you, I guess it's Acting Chair Klobuchar for the hearing.
All right, thank you very much, Senator Whitehouse. And I noticed, Mr. Nuzzo, that Mr. Lawrence has been getting a lot of the questions, and I know your daughters are watching. So Senator Lee and I promise we will ask you a question on a second round if no one else does. That's a little cute for you guys. Next up, we have Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you to you all for being here. In Tennessee, this has been an issue where there's been a lot of conversation about it. And Mr. Berchtold, thank you for your time yesterday to talk about this. As I told you, we've got a lot of people that are very unhappy with the way some of this has been approached. And there is frustration. We talked yesterday about the bots and how they impact Ticketmaster's operations, and you have blamed bot attacks on causing the crash during the Taylor Swift ticket sales, and ticket vendors seem to view bot attacks as normal to their operations. And Chair Durbin had mentioned, and of course we all know the Bots Act is something when I was in the House that got passed, signed into law. Senator Schumer had carried that over in the Senate. The FTC has only enforced this once, and they've had the authority to do this since 2016. So this is an unacceptable situation. Senator Blumenthal and I are going to do some more work on this at the Commerce Committee, at the Consumer Protection Subcommittee. But I do have a couple of questions. I've got about 4 questions, Mr. Berchtold, and I want to move quickly through this, so don't try to just run the clock out on me, which I don't appreciate that. So the data that you collect. Now, there's a 2019 report that showed that Ticketmaster's app has more downloads and more active users than any of its competitors. And I bet if I went down, everybody would shake their head yes, that is correct. And you have the most monthly active user growth that anyone is seeing. So, and I want you to submit the answers to this to me in writing. But let's take the Orange Bowl app, which I downloaded last month, taking my grandsons to the Orange Bowl. Go Vols, a big win there. That app is powered by Ticketmaster. Now, when you use that app, you can purchase parking, official merchandise, access travel sites. So you are getting a lot of consumer data and consumer information. So I want to know, what are you doing with that data? Now, you told me yesterday you block about 90% of the bot attacks that you get, but that's a failing grade. And we know that because, and there ought to be people you can get some good advice from, because our critical infrastructure in this country, whether it is utilities, electric, water, power, banking services, credit card processors, payment processors, healthcare companies, you know what? They get bot attacks every single day by the thousands. By the thousands. And they have figured it out, but you guys haven't. This is unbelievable. You ought to be able to get some good advice from some people and figure this out. So what are you doing with the information? As you get this bot attacks, are they coming in here and scooping up consumer information? When consumers buy tickets from StubHub and they're required to return to Ticketmaster to have their order fulfilled, are you getting their data? And what are you doing with it? Are you then sharing it with these other vendors? What kind of protections are around it? How are you safeguarding this? So I would like a response to that in writing from you, because that is going to determine how we move forward. The FTC has the responsibility. They have the authority, but you, sir, are responsible to the consumers. You're controlling 70%, 80% of the ability of consumers to access tickets to sporting events, to concerts. And when I run into an entertainer, and Mr. Lawrence, you need to come to Nashville.
We've been there. We just played a couple months ago.
Come on back. Make it your home.
Sure thing.
People love Tennessee. But, you know, we need to have an answer to this. Yes, the FTC has the authority. Yes, the legislation was signed into law. I agree that they are not exercising it. But how many times have you called the FTC and said, we need your help?
Yes, Senator, we will submit in writing the answers to your questions that you requested.
How many times have you called the FTC and say, help me with this?
We worked with the FTC on an investigation. I believe it was late 2019 or 2020. We obviously during COVID
So you called them
shut
once?
down.
You called them once and said, help me out?
That was the time that we were able to have the information and work with them to get prosecution.
Why is it that you cannot identify a bot attack? You told me yesterday you have a hard time distinguishing between a bot attack and a consumer. But the local power company down here that is not the billion-dollar company you are, they can tell when they've got a bad actor in their system. They figured out how to define a bot in their system, but you can't? Do we need to make certain you have better people around your IT team?
Yes, Senator, it is absolutely an ever-going arms race in terms of fighting the bots. These are bots that are not trying to generally break into our system. They're bots that are trying to impersonate people to get tickets on an automated basis faster and putting true fans at a disadvantage.
It is American consumers, true fans, yes, American consumers. Madam Chairman, I have one other question if we do a second round.
Okay, that'll be good. We will do a second round because we also want to get to solutions here. And I appreciate your question, Senator Blackburn. Next up, Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks so much, Chairman Klobuchar, and thank you for your great work on this issue and so many others involving antitrust, and my thanks as well to Senator Lee. Thank you to everyone for being here today. Mr. Berchtold, I want to congratulate and thank you for an absolutely stunning achievement. You have brought together Republicans and Democrats in an absolutely unified cause. And may I suggest respectfully that, unfortunately, your approach today in this hearing is going to solidify that cooperation, because as I hear and read what you have to say, it's basically, it's not us. It's everyone but us. And the fact of the matter is that Live Nation, Ticketmaster, is the 800-pound gorilla here. You have clear dominance. monopolistic control. This whole concert ticket system is a mess. It's a monopolistic mess. And the numbers refute many of your arguments. That's the reason we've had two, count them, two consent decrees, and why the Justice Department is now investigating violations of that second consent decree. Ticketmaster had the temerity to imply that the debacle involved in pre-ticket sales was Taylor Swift's fault because she was failing to do too many concerts. And may I suggest respectfully that Ticketmaster ought to look in the mirror and say, I'm the problem. It's me. And the reason is quite simply that you are the ones ultimately responsible for the astronomically rising prices, the exorbitant hidden fees, the sold out shows, the bots and scalpers. We just had an exchange with Senator Blackburn. You've reported once over this entire history, once, an instance involving bots. I agree with Senator Blackburn that there needs to be stronger enforcement by the FTC. It has taken almost no action against the bots, despite our support for the Bots Act. And that is the reason why I am supporting legislation, talking about remedies, legislation called the BOSS Act, which would require transparency, accountability for hidden fees, for bots. Will you support the BOSS Act?
Yes, Senator, we would absolutely agree that. I'm sorry. Senator, we absolutely agree there are a lot of problems in this industry, and as the leading player, we have an obligation to do better.
Will you support the BOSS Act?
I don't know all of the specific elements. I know there are many elements that we agree upon. I believe there are some issues that we have some differing views, and we've offered to discuss those. We'd like to continue to discuss those going forward.
Will you support legislation to require complete transparency, all in, to provide stronger enforcement powers against bots and scalpers?
We absolutely support all-in pricing. We absolutely support greater enforcement, greater penalties, and expansion of the prohibition on bots.
You know, the FTC has failed in some of its enforcement duties, but that is because Live Nation, Ticketmaster have failed to do the reporting that's required to enable enforcement. And I think that really betrays the contention that you have been active against it. And I think that consumers and artists and venues are all fed up with the system that exists right now. And I think to the people who are fed up, I would say, continue your criticism. If you're angry and frustrated, you have the power to demand action, and we should act with new legislation. If the Department of Justice establishes violation of the consent decree, unwinding the merger ought to be on the table. If the Department of Justice establishes facts that involve monopolistic and predatory abuses, there ought to be structural remedies, such as breaking up the company. We'll see what the Department of Justice finds. And to the FTC, we owe the duty of providing resources that are needed for more effective enforcement, and the incentives and the kinds of encouragement and support for action in this area. Let me ask you, will you support other kinds of legislation that would enable more transparency in this area?
As a general concept, absolutely, we support more transparency. And I also commit that if you pass harder laws on bots with greater enforcement, that I will commit that we will do our part to support that.
And will you take action against the bots?
If we get the laws that are going to be enforced and supported and have real teeth and penalties against people, we will do our
But you
part.
have the power right now to take action. Why haven't you done it?
We have a limited level of power on something that hasn't been consistently enforced.
You have unlimited power to go to court. Under the current Bots Act, which we have supported, we've given you the right of action. You are the only ones who have the resources and the knowledge to take effective action right now. Why haven't you done it?
Well, we'd love the support of further laws, of working with the FTC, getting other information on the actual sale of the bot-generated tickets on the various secondary platforms.
If you are concerned about artists, consumers, venues, and about the public interest, you would take action under current law. You have the right of action, you have the resources, and you have the kinds of legal authority to do it. And so that is why I come back to where I began. Your approach seems to be it's everyone else who's responsible here, not us. And I hope that that approach will change in the future. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Next up, we have Senator Kennedy and then Senator Hirono.
Mr. Berchtold, am I saying that right?
Yes, Senator, thank you.
Mr. Berchtold, I'm not against big per se. I am against dumb. And the way your company handled the ticket sales for Ms. Swift was a debacle. And whoever in your company was in charge of that ought to be fired. Number two, I hear two things today. I hear some of you saying that that we have an antitrust situation here, and that is wrong from an academic perspective and a consumer protection perspective. I hear others of you saying Live Nation's making too much money and we want some of it. Okay? But I hear all of you saying you care about the consumer, and I take you at your word. So how would you feel about adopting a rule, which it seems to me would satisfy the bot situation? Let's just adopt a rule. Well, strike that. I don't want to make it a suggestion because I want to think it through more. But let me ask you your opinion. You're the experts. What if we adopt a rule that said tickets to a Taylor Swift concert or Mr. Lawrence's band's concert are non-transferable? Now, you're not going to have a problem with bots, okay? If you got a scalper trying to buy 2,000 tickets, they don't want 2,000 tickets. They want a profit. And it'll hold down ticket prices. Why don't we do that? Don't everybody jump in at once.
I mean, I think whether it was that or only transferable at face value, I'm not an expert on the secondary ticketing market, so all I can tell you is that from the artist perspective, we would not make $1 less if that were implemented.
Mr. Lawrence, if you care about the consumer, and I hear you say that you do, I'll tell you what the consumer is concerned about. The consumer is not concerned about how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pin and whether this is an antitrust violation or not, or the FTC. The consumer is concerned about the price.
Yeah, so I'm saying I think.
So would you support non-transferability, or you can only transfer it at face value?
I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. I'm not an
Back
expert
to you, Ms.
on it.
Bradish.
Well, I think non-transferability is making a judgment in lieu of what a customer would make.
I understand what it means. Would you support that?
No.
Okay, how about you, Mr. Nuzzo?
I would respectfully not support such a rule.
Okay. How about you, Mr. Michaelson?
Michaelson, but that's good. Yes, Senator, good question. Totally support non-transferability.
Okay, thank you.
Totally.
Next, sir.
We respectfully think transferability is important for consumers.
You think it's important? Is it important for consumers or for the middlemen?
Like, let's say I'm going to a show with Jerry and I buy the tickets. I want to be able to send that ticket to Jerry so that we can go together.
That's the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, it's certainly, I think there's interesting ways we could use.
A few people may have to eat the ticket. They get sick, they can't go. But most people will think about that before they buy the ticket. Now, if you want to hold down prices, cut out the middlemen and the middlewomen. You want to cut out bots, make it non-transferable or transferable only at price, at face value. Couldn't a major artist, couldn't a Bruce Springsteen say, whose music I love, couldn't he say, look, I've got market power. I'm going to set this price for the ticket. I'm going to set this price for the service fee, and it's going to be non-transferable. Couldn't an artist do that with market power?
For sure. Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea, and
Problem solved.
Some artists have done that.
Problem solved.
For sure.
How about that, Mr. Burkholdt?
Yes, Senator, we would fully support an artist's right to make their shows non-transferable.
Do you support non-transferability or not?
We would support non-transferability, yes.
Well, then why isn't a big part of the problem just solved? Okay? If you care about the consumer, you're going to hold the price down. You're going to cut out the middleman. Now, we still have the problem of some of your colleagues say you're making too much money. Some of them say, I hear them say, you're making too much money and we want some of it. I hear others saying, you're making too much money and that's hurting the consumer because those fees get passed on. If you care about the consumer, cap the price. Cut out the bots. Cut out the middle people. And if you really care about the consumer, give the consumer a break. Not every kid can afford whatever it is, $500 to go see Taylor Swift. And I'd like to see Ms. Swift or Mr. Springsteen or some of the other major artists step up and say, you know what? We're going to support non-transferability. And we're going to cap the fees that are added on here. And we're going to make sure that the artist is paid a fair price. Everybody else can make a profit, but you can't make an obscene profit, especially the scalpers. If we do that, now we've done something. Now we've gone beyond how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pin and whether the FTC ought to be involved, and we know fully well that'll happen sometime in the next century. And whether something's a technical violation of the antitrust law, which we have to go litigate.
Okay.
My work here is done.
Senator Hirono. Thank you, Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that Mr. Nuzzo and Ms. Bradish, you just responded that you would not support non-transferability. Very briefly, could you explain why not?
Well, I think it goes to a regulatory solution to something that should be a competition issue. If there were competition, if we solve the competition issue here, then customers will get what they want. So I think this is, it doesn't get to the heart of the matter, essentially.
Mr. Nuzzo?
Yes, thank you very much, Senator. It's a good question, and ultimately we would look at it in a couple of ways. One is a property rights issue. As an individual purchasing a ticket, I should have the ability to transfer that ticket at a market rate. Secondly, I would point to a statistic, I believe it was from a GAO report, that close to, if not, a majority of the tickets on the resale market are going for under the market value. So while I would, contend that, I'm not going to pay $500, let alone $5,000 to go see Taylor Swift. The secondary market allows, kind of artists like the band Lawrence, who are selling to smaller venues and are growing, the ability to fill those venues, especially when those cases come where an individual is unable to use their ticket.
So isn't Ticketmaster also in the secondary market?
I believe the largest secondary market is StubHub, but I do believe Ticketmaster is either building or growing a secondary.
So I'm surprised that Mr. Berchtold says that he would definitely support non-transferability. Nothing is simple. Mr. Lawrence, as you sit here, can you tell me, what you hope will happen after this hearing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that we have a few specific things that we would just love to see changed in the industry, however we're able to get there. To list a few, I think that dealing with this whole inconsistency around ancillary revenues, which is something that we're not talking about as much today, the idea that Live Nation, or frankly most promoters, typically take 20% or more of our gross merchandise sales from the night, under the idea that they're providing the real estate, but we're providing all the customers. As Mr. Nuzzo was talking about, you say you're going to see a Harry Styles show, you're not going to XYZ Arena. So how come we don't get any of their bar sales? That's one example. I could keep listing more. Expansion of off-platform ticketing or ticketing choice, caps on fees, like we're talking about. Greater transparency on the settlement sheets that we receive at the end of the night. That's a whole other conversation, but I could list 10 things about the way those are formatted and broken out in a way that feels not totally ideal or fair to artists. I could go on and on.
So there are a number of things that we can do. Do these kinds of things for you to be able to probably negotiate better. Ms. Bradish, do we have to change any laws in order to enable an artist like Mr. Lawrence to do what he wants to be able to do?
Well, I think we need to support strong antitrust enforcement. We have to give the agencies the resources and the legislation, the clarity of legislation that will enable them to attack practices like this. So yes, we need to support and give resources to the existing antitrust agencies and the existing laws, and we should consider other laws like Senator Klobuchar's law that would clarify and strengthen those antitrust laws.
Also the BOSS Act, which Senator Blumenthal's bill, which I signed on to, which creates greater transparency.
Yes.
You testified, Ms. Bradish, that there should be a presumption for vertical mergers as we do for horizontal mergers. What would that presumption be for vertical mergers?
Well, for vertical mergers, we can obviously look at the share in a particular market. We can look at the ability of the monopolist to exercise power in another market, downstream or upstream. There are a number of ways to get at the same problem, but the idea is that you give the DOJ or FTC a foothold in order to be able to bring the case before a court, a foothold to be able to say this is illegal.
Do we need to amend the Sherman Act to create such a presumption for vertical mergers? Or do we need to strengthen the Clayton Act, Section 7?
Well, I think that the current Clayton Act and Sherman Act don't have the presumptions for horizontal mergers. Those come from the case law. So we don't necessarily need to change the fundamental contours of the Clayton Act and the Sherman Act. In fact, I would suggest that the Clayton Act already builds this in.
The Live Nation Ticketmaster merger has already occurred. I'm interested in what we can do to prevent this kind of market share capture in other vertical mergers. I just want to mention that we've been talking a lot about the debacle, I would say, of the Taylor Swift situation. And back in 2018, thousands of people in Hawaii tried and failed to get Bruno Mars tickets, and similar kinds of occurrences happened in Hawaii. And I heard Mr. Berchtold say that after the merger, they spent $1 billion to improve the Ticketmaster system. And so so you had in 2018 quite a few years after the merger. You had this similar kind of situation with Bruno Mars, and then you have Taylor Swift. So I'm just wondering what kind of improvements to the Ticketmaster system that is actually being followed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Rona, for using that example. Next up, we have Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Berchtold, if I could just start with you. Your company is currently under a consent decree with the Justice Department. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
Running through 2025, is that right?
Yes, Senator.
This is because the Justice Department says that your company repeatedly conditioned and threatened to condition Live Nation's provision of live concerts on a venue's purchase of Ticketmaster's ticketing services. Is that correct?
The Department of Justice alleged there were 6 instances in 2019 that they thought were violations. We agreed to extend the decree rather than to debate it in court because we had no interest in being perceived as defending the notion of threatening or retaliating.
Yeah, well, kind of extraordinary to have a consent decree running for such a long period of time and have you not even fight it in court. Let's talk about what your company is doing to try to control the resale market. You've been pushing something called Safe Ticks, which, as I understand it, it's a digital ticketing system. You need your phone for it, right? There's an app. It generates a barcode that then regenerates every few seconds. You can't print it off. You've got to use the app for it. Is that basically correct? Do I have the basics right there?
Yes, Senator. One of the major investments we've made over the past decade has been shifting ticketing from a paper ticket or a PDF to a on-the-phone digital ticket as a major issue towards security and to eliminate fraud.
Yeah, so I want to come back to that, but just so I understand the way the system works. So once you've got the app, then somebody who's got a ticket on the app can digitally transfer that ticket to another app user, but they can't print it off and resell the ticket on StubHub, for instance. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator, they cannot print it off because the notion of printing it would open susceptibility to fraud and duplication of that ticket.
So you could only, let me just be clear about the way this works. You could only resell it through the Ticketmaster ecosystem. Is that right?
No, Senator. Those tickets are often resold on StubHub, CGeek, and other secondary ticketing platforms.
Okay. So let me just ask you about the counterfeiting question here. I mean, what kind of scale are we talking about here? I mean, what percentage of tickets sold in the secondary market do you think are counterfeited?
Well, I think that in today's digital ticket, the counterfeit ticket has been all but eliminated. We still have a large issue with speculative tickets being sold where the seller doesn't actually own the right to the ticket but is selling it to the fan who's unaware of that. But the old issue of having a PDF photocopied multiple times and resold has been eliminated.
How does the resale of the Safe Ticks, how does that resale with another entity, let's say StubHub, just for illustrative purposes, how does that work? How can I, if I had a Safe Ticks ticket, how could I resell it on StubHub?
You could list your ticket on StubHub. There would be a buyer. The buyer would buy the ticket. You would transfer that ticket to the recipient's Ticketmaster account if it were a concert, if it were an NFL ticket, to their StubHub account.
Do you have any plans to restrict the resaleability of digital tickets through third-party entities like StubHub or others?
We have no plans to restrict that transferability. We do believe that the artist should have the right to set the rules, as we were discussing earlier, in terms of the nature of the transferability. We believe there should be no difference between the rules that we, Ticketmaster, follow and what any of the other platforms can do.
So let me just ask you about the transferability question. Why is it good for consumers to limit transferability? Why, I heard your exchange with Senator Kennedy. I don't understand why it's a good thing for the ticket buyer to not be able to resell her tickets or his tickets.
Senator, I think that tickets in concerts in particular are a unique animal in that those tickets are often underpriced by the artists because they want to deliver value to the fans. And that creates the opportunity, a $5 billion a year opportunity in the United States, for the industrial scalping of tickets using bots to unfairly gain possession of those tickets, illegally gain possession of those tickets, and resell them on the secondary. So the transferability comes into play as part of the discussion, or this comes into the discussion on transferability. Given that illegal activity, that is enabled by ease of transfer.
But are there other examples of markets, ticket markets, where we limit transferability in that way?
Senator, I'm not aware of other markets where you have such a substantial arbitrage in the value.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you can't do it obviously with movie tickets. Let's say. I mean, those are freely transferable. I just worry about the effect on consumers and prices. If you tell a consumer who buys her ticket that she can't then turn around and sell it, I mean, you talk about a market intervention. That's a pretty significant one. I understand why the artists would like it. I certainly understand why you would like it. It's not clear to me why it's good for consumers.
Yes, Senator, I think we believe it's good for consumers because it would mean that the consumers could buy all of those tickets rather than having what is often 20 to 30% of concert tickets purchased by scalpers using bots and put on the secondary market directly.
Let me just, Madam Chair, I know I'm over time and Senator Cruz wants to ask questions. Let me just really quickly here ask Ms. Bradish if I could. I want to come back to this consent decree extension that's now running out through 2025. What DOJ alleged in 2020 was pretty significant. They said that there had been violation of the earlier consent decree, that Live Nation had retaliated. They'd violated the plain language of the decree. It's not normal, is it, for antitrust consent decrees to get extended like this after violations are identified? Am I correct?
That's correct.
So what do you think's going on here?
Well, I think it certainly shows that the problem that they anticipated in 2010 has come to pass in 2020. It means that Ticketmaster Live Nation is a monopolist whose conduct needs to be supervised. I don't think that this changes their incentives, so it makes it very difficult in the long run for DOJ to actually supervise it.
You don't think it changes Live Nation's incentives, you're
right.
saying?
I mean, their incentives are still to bully.
Right.
Others.
What should happen then, in your view?
A structural remedy. There should be a spinoff. There should be disintegration of the vertical integration.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Hawley. Before Senator Cruz, Senator Tillis was here first. Thank you, Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Mr. Lawrence, don't lose sight. Do you want to do nothing with me? And let's see, what's the other one? Oh, it's not all about you. Sounds like you've been eavesdropping on conversations among senators as an inspiration for those songs.
Thank you. That's what it's all
also,
based.
just want to point to the fact we're looking at, I think, at the time anyway, the youngest member of the Songwriters Guild after you helped your dad figure out how to deal the Miss America pageant or revise it for the purposes of that movie.
Something like that, yeah.
Let me ask you, first off, on the issue of transferability, I'm a Ticketmaster user. I'm a season ticket holder for the Carolina Panthers. It seems to me that I like the idea of an artist being able to do that. Maybe that's what Taylor Swift should have done because it would have probably avoided the situation we had there. But I think a broad brush policy on non-transferability has all kinds of problems to the point that Senator Hawley made, and I could think of other ones. I also think when we talk about scalpers, there are scalpers out there, but there are also people that are speculating on the market being able to demand a higher price. That sounds like a free market principle I don't want to get too far ahead of. So I think we have to be very careful when we talk about things like that. Mr. Berchtold, I'm trying to, clearly Ticketmaster and Live Nation are in the crosshairs. So can you give me two things? I was also prompted by the discussion you had with Senator Blumenthal. One, tell me what you're doing to address what you think, whether or not you believe they're valid, you can see forces working against you. What specifically is Ticketmaster and Live Nation doing to prevent Congress from doing something to you?
Well, thank you, Senator. I think that first we're here today. We'd like to engage in a discussion about what are the policy changes that can be made that can make this a better consumer experience. We believe all-in pricing makes a lot of sense. It simply is clear up front what price you're paying. We believe that there are absolutely deceptive practices that take place today in ticketing. I could give it.
If I may, 'cause I'm going to stick to time.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
I think that it would and I'm sure you're already thinking about it, but it's getting ahead of something that's probably, but for good faith efforts on you all's part, you may get a congressional prescription that's going to have some bad side effects. Mr. Lawrence, and this back to you also, Mr. Berchtold. Is there a mechanism now to where Mr. Lawrence knows exactly what the underlying transaction for a given performance or given production resulted in? In other words, can he get, at the end of the day, I think they set a price at $30 for one venue. Is there any sort of back-end reporting to a performer saying this is how it all stacked up and this is how everybody in the mix actually benefited from it? I mean, do you have that sort of transparency today?
At the end of the day, we're given a settlement sheet, but that settlement sheet gives us, the base price. So it would be that $30, but I would also add that I mentioned earlier about a thing called facility fees, where not only does the settlement sheet not show the extra $12, it might bring it to 42. It'll sometimes even say like 27, even though the base price was 30, because the venue's also just sort of arbitrarily taking an additional $3. So the sheet we get says the tickets were sold for 27 rather than 30 or even 42, which feels a little bizarre to me.
Yeah, I believe that that general notion of the settlement is correct. If Mr. Lawrence and others are not getting the rate card on the service fees up front and having that made available to them, that's a problem on our end that I'll look into coming out of this.
It seems like that needs to be there on the front end.
I agree with that, and I think that there should be total transparency that Mr. Lawrence has. If there's a facility fee, he should know what that is. I think that's fairly standard practice. Again, we represent a minority of venues, but I think that the full transparency should be available to Mr. Lawrence and others in his position.
Mr. Nuzzo, in the remaining 20 seconds, what do you want to say?
I think transferability is extraordinarily important. I think, to your point about there are far more externalities and side effects to completely excluding transferability, and that's something that kind of underscored the first part of my remarks this morning.
I think as we go through I for one love hyper-competitive market forces, where we get into the rub as to what extent has it gone from hyper-competitive to anti-competitive. And I think that this hearing and subsequent discussions are going to be helpful to strike the right balance. I'm probably somewhere in the middle, not necessarily pulling for either team, but I do think that there's work that we need to do here. Some of it has to be self-regulation from the entities playing in this space. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Tillis. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to each of the witnesses for being here. I think this is an issue that impacts a great many families. Whether you go to sporting games, I go to a lot of sporting activities, or whether you go to concerts, or whether you go to plays, families enjoy going out. They enjoy entertainment. And going through the process of getting a ticket can sometimes be gratifying and a lot of times really frustrating. I start from the principle that free markets are good, that if you want to have goods and services delivered to consumers, that free and competitive markets are the most effective way to do so at the most price competitive levels. I also start from a principle that monopolies are bad, that monopolies historically have hurt consumers, driven up costs, reduced options, and made the consumer experience markedly worse. I also would make an observation that in the big tech sphere in particular, we've seen monopolies being willing to be particularly abusive. I want to start with a question for the witnesses, and Mr. Gretzinger, I'm going to start with you and just ask, in your judgment, is Ticketmaster a monopoly?
Unequivocally.
Mr. Michaelson?
Yes, sir, without a doubt.
Mr. Nuzzo?
Yes, absolutely.
Ms. Bradish?
It's certainly acting like a monopoly.
Mr. Lawrence?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So, Mr. Berchtold, do you agree with the other witnesses on this panel?
We absolutely believe the ticketing business has never been more competitive. We believe that fact is demonstrated by every venue renewal that has multiple credible offers in a bidding process.
So are they just making it up? Why does everyone else perceive you as a monopoly? Where's that coming from?
I can't speak to all of their motivations on their points of view, but I think that if you simply look at what is the market power exercised by venues, which is perhaps not fully understood in our business.
How about on the ticketing side? What percent of the market do y'all have?
I would estimate, depending on how you want to count what's in the market, between 50 and 60%. 50 and 60,
and depending on how you count it, does anyone have a markedly different measure of that?
Yes, sir, Senator. They have 87% of the ticketing contracts at the NBA and the NHL arenas. They have 93% of the ticketing contracts at the NFL stadiums. Those are the most important venues. You cannot include, if he's including, it's, yes, I'll stop there.
And can I fairly blame Mr. Berchtold for the Texans having such a lousy season and the Rockets having such a lousy seasons and the Cowboys just losing? I mean, but the Astros did win the World Series, so I have something to cheer about. But I guess I can't blame you for that, but I recognize the frustration. Let me ask you, Ticketmaster's dominant position in the marketplace, how does it hurt consumers? Mr. Gretzinger?
Most fundamentally by eliminating competition. There's not a vibrant group of dozens of companies out there competing to build the best consumer experience.
And what does that mean if you want to go see a game? What does that mean for a consumer? How is life worse because there's not a more effective competition in the marketplace?
It means you're beholden to whatever Ticketmaster Live Nation gives you, and they have an incentive to not innovate and to maintain the status quo because the status quo benefits them versus having a vibrant group of competition that's working to do what's best for consumers, artists, venues, all of the stakeholders in this industry.
Mr. Michaelson?
It's a bigger question than just Ticketmaster, because when you combine Live Nation with Ticketmaster, it's the different question.
All right, well, answer it that way then, the two together.
Yes. Look, the combination of the two provides them with a different business model than the rest of us independent promoters. We have to make money at putting on concerts. They don't, because they make more money from ticketing and from sponsorship than they do from concerts. And concerts is basically a lost leader for them to bring more talent and bring more content to the arenas that they're servicing to get the ticketing contracts.
So your testimony is they're essentially undercutting the competition in the live performance market and subsidizing it using the ticket revenue. Is that
ticket revenue and sponsorship revenue, yes.
Okay. Mr. Nuzzo?
And here's how it looks to the consumer. A friend of mine sent me a screenshot of a ticket purchase she made for, I believe it was a Shania Twain concert in Orlando, and the tickets were $227 each, but when she got to the final screen where she had to actually hit the button to make the order, they turned into $291 a piece. That works out to a 30% bump on the very last screen of the transaction. She had no choice at that point but to accept that bump in price. That's how it looks to a consumer.
Ms. Bradish?
Well, I think Sal brings up a great point with choice. It reduces the choice, not just of consumers who have to pay higher ticket fees, but also of artists like Mr. Lawrence. They don't have a choice of what venues to go to, what ticketing businesses that they will be dealing with. And for others all up and down the supply chain in live entertainment, these kind of behaviors reduce choice.
And Mr. Lawrence, finally for artists, what's the impact?
The impact is that we have very little say or transparency or choice in a lot of aspects of how the financials of our deals are put together, and no say or choice or visibility in what our fans experience when buying our tickets.
And if the chair will give me the indulgence of one very quick final question.
Sure.
Which is one of the things that's come up has been all-in ticketing, both for consumers and or transparency for artists. Do any of the witnesses disagree with the proposition that that would be a good idea and a material improvement from where we are today?
No disagreement from JAM as an independent promoter, none.
Okay, well, some area of agreement, that's always a good thing. Now, if you could help the Texans, that would be appreciated.
All right. Thank you, Senator Cruz. And I just want to clarify, Senator Cruz had some good questions about the market percentage of you, Mr. Michaelson, and you brought them up. And because I think people need to hear these numbers. So according to your testimony, 87% of Billboard's top 40 tours in 2022 were performed at venues ticketed by Ticketmaster. Is that right?
That is correct.
And Mr.
87%. Yes, correct.
And do you disagree with that, Mr. Brooktoe?
I don't know the numbers that he's talking about. I haven't done the analysis, so I couldn't comment.
Okay, well, we'll do that in writing, but it seems to me like that's a lot. Okay, and then secondly, another thing that you brought up, Mr. Michaelson, in answer to Senator Cruz. Today, 87% of NBA teams, 87.5% of NHL teams, and 93% of NFL teams, I assume including the Vikings, have exclusive ticketing agreements with Ticketmaster. Is that right?
That is correct, and the teams are broken down in my testimony that I provided.
Okay. Dispute?
That seems inconsistent, Senator, with the information that I indicated about CGeek taking between 2018 and 2022, 15% of the NFL and the NBA market.
Okay, well,
I would say that I do acknowledge we absolutely have the leading share in those because there's no mystery. We have the best product. And we have a product that is particularly suited to the very complex requirements.
We were just doing facts here, so. But I understand your answer. Mr. Grossinger, do you want to reply to that?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly disagree with the assertion around product. I think we don't know who has the best product because there's not competition. There's only one real choice that a venue can make.
Okay, and then in 2020, the DOJ confirmed that Ticketmaster has been the, quote, largest primary ticketing service provider for major concert venues in the United States for at least 3 decades. I don't think we doubt that. Anyone? Okay. Next, Live Nation revenue grew from $5 billion to over $11.5 billion from 2010 to 2019. Is that correct, Mr. Brooktoe?
I don't have the exact numbers, but that sounds right.
Okay. Then we have, I'm just going to quote from a New York Times article, 2018, that said this, and if it's wrong, you tell me, and maybe it's changed a bit because it's 2018. Ticket prices are at record highs, service fees are far from reduced, and Ticketmaster, part of the Live Nation empire, still tickets 80 of the top 100 arenas in the country. No other company has more than a handful. No competitor has risen to challenge its preeminence.
As I indicated in my comments, I believe you said that was 2018. Between 2018 and 2022, SeatGeek in particular has been very effective in winning major NFL and NBA clients.
Okay, but do you know, Mr. Grossinger, if we're like 5 off for the number of arenas or what we are
small
here?
Percentages. My data, which our team pulled, was that Ticketmaster is the primary ticketing provider for more than 80% of the NBA, NHL, and NFL teams. I would also note...
More than, say it again?
More than 80%.
80%, yeah.
And that was around the same percentage back in 2009 when we were first looking at this.
Yeah, I just want to dispel this notion, Ms. Bradish, that this is not a monopoly. And then we can go from there about solutions. So let's talk about that. Ms. Bradish, you talked about the need to update our antitrust laws. Senator Lee and I have had numerous hearings. We have made headway, as I noted, at the end of the year to focus to help our antitrust enforcers so they're not taking on the biggest companies the world has ever known with duct tape and Band-Aids when we know there are a number of people that work at these agencies, or in some cases less than it was during the Nixon administration, and yet these companies have grown bigger and bigger. So I appreciate the support of the United States Senate on this front, Democrats and Republicans. Now we have to go to the next step, which is albeit harder. We have some specific things we're all working on tech, when it comes to issues like ticket prices, but the issue here is that we've seen a narrowing of our antitrust laws, and that's why I think for both discriminatory conduct and mergers, we need to step back a bit, as a number of us have on this committee and look at some changes. They don't have to be exactly the changes each person wants, but could you talk about the importance of making it easier to enforce these antitrust laws when we have seen 75% of the industries in our nation, from cat food to caskets, see more consolidation?
Yeah, I mean, in particular with respect to vertical mergers and monopolization Section 2 cases, case law has narrowed and narrowed and narrowed the window for the enforcers to go after this kind of conduct. So anything that will open that window, that will give an opportunity for the enforcers to actually get at this conduct and this kind of merger activity is going to be what we need to restore competition.
Okay. Anyone want to add to that? Okay. Some of today's witnesses we know have raised, and we really appreciate all of you, concerns about ticketing, especially you, Mr. Lawrence, with some very practical things. It would be great if some of these kind of smaller things that are difficult for you to deal with just got resolved after this hearing. We love that. It shows we did something for the day for a change. So that's great, but I think we all know, as Ms. Bradish has been pointing out, and as Mr. Michaelson and Mr. Grosinger and Mr. Nuzzo have been pointed out, these things are sometimes bigger than that. And let's get what we can right now, but there's bigger things. So one of the things we've heard complaints about is so-called drip pricing, when the consumer doesn't see the full price of the ticket, including fees up front, and has to wait until near the end of the transaction process to get the final price. This is what was just pointed out, right, Mr. Nuzzo?
Yes, correct.
Okay, very good. Should Congress mandate all-in pricing on ticketing platforms so that the full ticket price is disclosed up front?
I would stipulate that there is likely an interstate commerce reason for Congress to act in this capacity. I live in North Florida. There are a lot of people from South Georgia that come to Tallahassee occasionally when the Florida State Seminoles are having a winning season. And so from the extent and the nexus of interstate commerce, I would stipulate there's probably a window for Congress to act, even though I would also like to state on most issues I am a states person.
I just guessed it, but okay. Anything anyone wants to add to that? I noticed you were consulting with, I would like to say your lawyer, but it's your bandmate, Mr. Lawrence, in answer to this question. It was very, very impressive. All right, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I think while the spirit of the all-in pricing thing is a great idea, a concern that I have is if artists continue to have no say in the on-top portion of the fees, then like while, as we talked about, I do have a say in setting the base ticket price, all of a sudden if I set a ticket price of $30, but then they're just seeing an all-in fee of $50, at least in the current system, fans know which is the base ticket price and which is the fee. So even if the drip pricing were eliminated, it would still be great.
So you want to do something up front to...
If there was something on that first screen that still said, these are the added Ticketmaster fees, so that the fans know...
That was my second question. Like, you should be a senator, I think, here. So what you're saying is you want to have differentiate on the fees, and then you also want to deal with this.
But what I really want is for artists to have a say in those fees and for them to be lower. But in the under the current system where we have absolutely no say or transparency in the fees, I wouldn't want to have to take any responsibility of those to our fans.
Okay. We have anyone on this? Okay. We also have heard about sellers offering to sell tickets they don't even have. That's speculative ticket sales when they don't have it. Is that something that Congress should prohibit? Mr. Michaelson?
Definitely. I mean, you go online and on any high demand show, and they're selling tickets that they do not have. Absolutely, and Mr. Berchtold could certainly opine about that, but that needs to be banned somehow. I don't know whether it's Congress or by state, but something needs to be done. It's deceptive and just not right.
Okay. Then I know you, Ms. Bradish, talked about this idea of spinning off companies. We've all seen that as a remedy that would most likely be coming from the Justice Department. So all we can do here is put forward the evidence, and these are sworn testimonies back and forth under law so that the Justice Department can look at this discussion. But clearly, this is something that could be looked at, because I think we can legislate on some of these things about pricing. But if you truly have a situation where you have a monopoly on these three corners of this triangle, right, which is this combo of the ticketing and the promotions, and then the arenas, or not all arenas are on the long contracts, long-term contracts on the arenas. That is also an issue that that creates this problem for us, where the customers are basically trapped in the middle. So anything anyone wants to comment about that and how that would aid you in competing, Mr. Grosinger? Oh, Mr. Michaelson.
Thank you. Again, when I look back at history, which always guides us, I look back at the Paramount case, U.S. versus Paramount in the late 40s, where the movie studios contracted and controlled the actors. They made the films, they had the distributor, and they had the movie theaters that those played in. The government broke that up, and then it became fairer for everybody else to compete. So I think that's a solution you need to look at. I think another solution might be maybe no exclusive ticketing contracts at buildings. In Europe, in the UK, they don't have exclusive
That's what
ticketing
my
contracts.
last question was going to be, and we'll count that answer. No, it's interesting. So they don't have that in Europe. Okay. All right. Anything more?
Oh, sorry, I was just going to mention, another difference between the Europe and the U.S. market is that for Europe soccer teams, for EPL teams, they typically don't have concerts. So they're not worried about this whole concert threat that we've been talking about. And as a result, you see a markedly different market outcome, where those venues actually make the ticketing decision based on the merits of the product, what's actually best for their fans and best for their business. And we've been talking about the 80% or so market share that Ticketmaster has here in the U.S. among major sports teams. That's only 20% of EPL teams, whereas CGeek's fortunate, due to a stronger product, to have about 10 of the 20 EPL teams there.
Okay. Senator Lee is deferring to Senator Blackburn. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Let me just say, we do appreciate you all being here, and we need, Music City USA needs you all to be successful. And this is an issue of fairness, whether it is the consumer, whether it's the artist, whether it is the production manager. This is an issue of fairness. And right now, we have a system that is not fair. Now, I want to pick up on the issue of spec tickets. And Mr. Berktold, you and I discussed this a little bit yesterday. And you mentioned the Madonna tour, that already there are tickets available on the secondary market. This is pre-sale. Pre the window opening. You have Zach Bryan, who is not working with you but on his tour, but you said the secondary market has those tickets. Well, as I thought about this last night and thought about our discussion and worked on my questions, I thought, why is it that these secondary markets are so brazen that they would go ahead and put these tickets up for sale? Doesn't make sense, does it? But you know what does? What it does is raise the question, is it that the bots have become so aggressive and so certain that you're not going to do anything to them, that you're not going to shut them down, that they just move forward and advertise things they have not yet purchased because they have figured out you will not call the FTC. You will not report them. You have not built the kind of cyber safeguards that are necessary to protect the consumer, and you are building a treasure trove of information on these consumers. I bet you even have a marketing arm that takes all that data. You know somebody is partial to some certain type tours, and then you're marketing back to them, sending them notifications. But let's talk about this. Why is it that you believe these sites have moved forward with advertising tickets that they have not yet purchased? Why are they so confident?
Senator, I agree with your assessment that those markets that put up.
Okay, you agree
tickets.
with my
Yes.
assessment,
Yes.
sir.
Yes.
So what are you going to do about this? Are you going to strengthen your protections so that these bots cannot get in there? You know, you told me yesterday, let's talk about this a little bit. You told me yesterday that you have a difficult time deciding what is a bot and what is a consumer. So why is it that you have not developed the algorithm to sort out what is a bot and what is a consumer? Why is it that the bank can do it? As I said earlier, why is it the local power company can do it, but you can't?
Yes, Senator, we're continually investing in advanced bot detection. It's an arms race. There is so much money at stake.
How much have you invested and what is your timeline for securing your site so that consumers know their data is secure with you? When are you planning to have this done?
Yes, we've invested over $1 billion over the past decade. In addition to specific technology to stop bots, we've developed products such as Verified Fan, which is intended.
Okay, as we talk about Verified Fan, why is it that that data is not protected to the point to prohibit these incursions and these hacks coming in to that information? And as you have pre-cleared these individuals and cast them as verified fans, then what are you doing to protect their information? How do they know that their information is secure on your site?
Yes, Senator, using Verified Fan, the bots haven't gotten in, but that does not stop them from attacking the system.
Well, you told us that with the Taylor Swift instance, that it was the Verified Fan that was a problem. So is Verified Fan safe or is Verified Fan not safe? I mean, what are we looking at here?
Verified Fan was effective in making sure that the tickets that were sold to fans. It was successful in that we are compliant with CCPA, with GDPR in terms of data security. It was an issue of the load on the system from the combination of bots pretending to be humans to try to get in.
So you were underestimating the popularity of a Taylor Swift concert and ticket. Now, let me ask you about this. This is another thing I thought about from our conversation yesterday. You said that the only course of action for Ticketmaster in identifying a buyer is a bot is after the transaction is completed. You said you couldn't tell until after because I discussed with you how some fans will have tickets in their cart and then during the checkout process, the tickets leave the cart. And I asked why you wouldn't empty the cart of the bot. And you said, well, it's hard to figure this out until the transaction is completed. So why is it that you can only do that? Why can you not algorithmically flag these suspicious transactions during the sale process? Because once they've got that, then the consumer can't get that ticket. Once they are into somebody's cart and you are processing that card, then that's not available to the consumer. So, sir, with all due respect, you have not solved your problem by saying, well, we flag it at the end. The issue is you have got to beef up your systems, your verification systems. You have to strengthen your cyber protections. It sounds like you need some good advice on how to follow some of the protections that are there for financial institutions and credit card processors and healthcare institutions and utilities. And we are hopeful that you're going to be able to do that. As I said, we need all of you to be successful and to be fair. And by the way, Mr. Lawrence, come to Nashville. Be happy to have you there. Thank you,
There you go. Good invitation. Senator Lee.
Thanks so much. We've had a lot of talk in the last few rounds about restrictions on the ability of a consumer, a purchaser of a ticket, being able to sell it to someone else. A lot of people seem to think that's somehow a solution. I think it's a nightmare dressed like a daydream. I don't think we ought to go there. There are a lot of complaints about doing this. Look, no one is particularly fond of scalpers, generally speaking, but this isn't about scalpers. This is about the purchasers of the tickets themselves. They may have perfectly legitimate reasons, whether it's a change of plans or otherwise, to resell tickets that they've already purchased. In a number of states, including New York, Illinois, and my home state of Utah, we have laws that restrict these sorts of things. In Utah specifically, the Ticket Transferability Act in place in my state requires that at least 90% of tickets for an event be transferable. And so, Mr. Nuzzo, we'll start with you on this one. Do you think federal policymakers ought to take a similar approach with this, or is this particular issue best left to the states?
Thank you, Senator. And I would reiterate the comment I made earlier about there being a nexus with interstate commerce. In any state, you are going to have folks from out of state purchasing tickets to an in-state concert event, sports stadium. So there is a role for the Congress to play in this.
Is it one that needs to be played? I mean, you're not suggesting that there would be a dormant commerce, wouldn't be a dormant commerce problem with the states doing it?
No, I do not. But I do recognize the efficiencies by a federal solution as opposed to a 50-state patchwork in this realm.
That makes sense. Ms. Bradish, the most common justification that we hear when this sort of thing comes up about ticket transferability is that artists want it. And now the artists, as the argument goes, want to stop scalpers and help their friends, help their followers, their biggest fans. But why should artists be able to tell their fans what to do with a ticket purchased from the venue? And does that really sound like something that you would do in defense of the very same people you want to buy your ticket, is tell them if you've got a change of plans, you're out of luck? Or does it sound more like Ticketmaster and certain other actors, including in some cases, artists, are simply sharing monopoly rents?
Exactly. And I think what this points out is that when an industry suggests its own cures, we also have to look at the possibility that it has another effect, which is, in this case, perhaps to keep customers within the Ticketmaster ecosystem.
Right. Mr. Gartzinger, sticking to the issue of ticket transferability, it seems to be that impairing transferability might also harm competition and therefore consumers by preventing legitimate secondary ticketing companies from gaining any traction. And the logic there is that if you're stopping legitimate secondary ticketing companies from gaining any traction, you're also forestalling would-be future nascent competitors who could rise up through the marketplace and potentially challenge Ticketmaster. Do you share this concern?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think this industry already lacks competition. Reducing transferability just exacerbates that problem. A related issue is if the incumbent were to allow transferability but only on its own platform, or only allow fulfillment on its own platform. It's a way to force all consumer data and all transaction fees onto that platform.
Right. Now, Mr. Burchell, if I purchase a ticket on Ticketmaster, is that my ticket? And if it's my ticket, isn't that my property to use or dispose of or transfer as I deem fit?
Yeah, Senator, I think this discussion on transferability exists simply because of the volume of industrial scalping that takes place, the harvesting of those tickets that disrupts the relationship between the artist and the fan. And as we submitted, one of the notes was a letter from Garth Brooks, who's well known for being one of the leading advocates of providing a great show and a great value for his fans, who called out very specifically that it's the scalping that takes place that is the origin of the problems that we have, and everything else is a derivative issue.
Well, there are other issues, of course, and that may be his view, but he's not, I don't think he's necessarily considering the Consumer Welfare Standard or the Sherman Act or the Clayton Act when making that statement. So I'm going to ask you this. Will you, on behalf of Ticketmaster, commit right now to offering fair, reasonable, non-discriminatory API access to legitimate secondary ticketing services to facilitate the safe and easy transfer of tickets without limiting customers to the Ticketmaster app? And if not, why not?
Senator, first, we believe that the artist does have the right to set the rules by which ticket transfer takes place in today's environment with the high volume of scalping. Second, with digital tickets, there needs to be the maintenance of a digital right master that is held centrally. And as part of fraud prevention, we're not going to put that out in the wild to enable fraud.
I'd like to get Mr. Gretzinger's response to that and also ask Mr. Gretzinger to just talk about how competition with Ticketmaster has impacted innovation in the ticketing space.
The NFL provides a great counterexample to that, where the NFL has created an ecosystem where ourselves, Ticketmaster, and StubHub all compete. Those open APIs exist, and it works really well for NFL fans. There's no technical reason, there's no master manifest reason that couldn't exist in other venues. It's just a business reason that it doesn't. And I'm sorry, I forgot your other question.
Just tell me how competition with Ticketmaster, how has competition with Ticketmaster impacted innovation in the ticketing space?
I think it's severely stunted it. Like I mentioned earlier, I'd love to have a ton of brilliant, vibrant developers and companies trying to make better solutions, I would love that this bot issue we hadn't been talking about for a decade because so many people had been competing to build a better mousetrap that it didn't exist anymore. And unfortunately, that's not.
So the absence of competition has stunted it to the extent you're able to see some developing semblance of competition. How does or how will or how would that impact innovation in the ticketing space?
Yeah, what makes it really hard for us is, we are trying our darndest to build the absolute best ticketing software on earth and make tickets more accessible to fans, get more people to go to events. We believe we have that. We'll then go to a venue and try to bid competitively, and they make a choice against what is the best technology because they are afraid of losing concerts if they don't choose CGeek. And I think while that underlying reality exists, it's going to be very, very hard, if not impossible, to have a fair, vibrant, competitive market.
Thank you. See, my time's expired. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very good. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Berchtold, if I could just come back to you. You told me in our last exchange that a safe ticket, a digital ticket with Ticketmaster, could be sold elsewhere on StubHub, for example, right? Am I remembering correctly?
Yes, Senator.
But what you didn't say, but which is, I think, deeply relevant here, is that in order to get that digital ticket, the person who buys it has to come inside the Ticketmaster ecosystem, correct? They've got to get the Ticketmaster app because it's a digital Ticketmaster ticket, yes?
Yes, that is the same standard if I buy a ticket on from a venue that SeatGeek is the primary ticketing provider for. If I want to buy a ticket on Vivid, I then have to have a SeatGeek app in the same way.
Well, this is a huge advantage to you, though, is it not? Because if you are forcing any buyer, and we're talking about the resale market here, just to be clear, in the resale market, you're forcing any purchaser to come into your ecosystem to sign up. And I noticed, by the way, that you advertise this from your own website. You advertise that one of the advantages of the Safe Ticket digital ticket is that it will allow event owners to communicate directly with event attendees, including those who buy their ticket through resale, and allow them to engage with the attendees after an event is over. In other words, you're talking here about data. You're selling effectively the data of all of these people who have not bought direct from you. They want to buy on the resale market, but they've got to come into your ecosystem, give you their data in order to get this ticket. That's tremendous advantage to you, no?
It is, Senator, it does not quite work that way. It is our policy that if an account is established solely for the purposes of receiving a ticket, we do not use that data for purposes of marketing.
So wait a minute, they can't communicate. When you say on your website that anybody who has a safe ticket, that the event owner will be able to engage with them once the event is over, will be able to offer personalized food and beverage and merchandise offers, that's not true?
In the context of the event itself, I believe there is some ability to reach out to connect with those fans.
Once the event is over, you say?
Yeah, Ticketmaster does not use that data for marketing to individuals.
Well, how do they contact them once the event is over?
That copy may not be accurate, sir.
This is on your website.
Yeah, I'll have to look at it.
This is how you're advertising your digital ticketing to folks to event owners.
Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that. It does not sound accurate.
Well, what it sounds like is a data industrial complex. I mean, that you, a monopoly, are now forcing in the resale market. You're using your monopoly on the front end to create a monopoly in the resale market where you're forcing everybody in the resale market to come into your ecosystem effectively. Of course, you also have your own resale platform. So, I mean, basically, if they're going to have to come into your ecosystem anyway to get a ticket that they bought on StubHub, why even go to StubHub or anywhere else? Why not just come to you directly, right? I mean, this is how monopolies work. You leverage market power in one market to get market power in another market, and it looks like you're doing that in, frankly, multiple markets. You're doing it in the resale market. You're doing it with data. Mr. Grutzinger, you're nodding your head. Am I right about this?
Yeah, very much agree.
Just explain to everybody why that's significant, because you commented on this just a second ago. You said that if you had a player who could force everybody onto one platform and all consumers to put their data into one person's platform, we'd have a big problem. Isn't that what Ticketmaster's doing effectively?
Exactly, and it stifles competition completely. We were giving the StubHub example earlier. Mr. Berthold gave the example of the StubHub seller having to then transfer on Ticketmaster. The reality is that recipient needs to create a Ticketmaster account, download the app, sign in. Basically, they're forced to sign up to Ticketmaster just to receive the ticket that they bought on StubHub.
Yeah, it's when you think about it, it's really something. You're forcing everybody who just wants to get this ticket on the resale market, who hasn't bought from you, Mr. Berthold, to begin with, you're forcing them to become your customer in order to take possession of this ticket. I mean, that's really something. I mean, hats off to you, I guess, for being innovative and using your monopoly. But I have to tell you, from a competition standpoint, this really, really worries me, because this looks like a way to, again, further leverage your market power in one market to expand it into other markets. And I just don't see how consumers win out of this exchange. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very good. Thank you. Well said, Senator Hawley. Do you want to have a closing statement here, Senator Lee? I think we end as we always do with the two of us. Please go ahead.
This has been a really helpful hearing. I've appreciated each of your comments and insights. And it is the first time we've ever held an antitrust hearing with a band member rather than a lawyer accompanying a witness. And so thank you for coming as well. This is an important issue, and it relates to a lot of things that we confront on this subcommittee from time to time. It deals with the intersection of consumer rights, consumer welfare, and our antitrust laws. And so it's very important that we maintain fair, free, open, and even fierce competition in this and as in every other space. And the reason we focus on that is because when there's competition, it does two things, both of which are very valuable to the average American. It increases quality and it reduces price. We want those things to happen. And so that's why we focus as we do on this. I have to throw out, in deference to my daughter Eliza, one more Taylor Swift quote. Karma's a relaxing thought. Aren't you envious that for you it's not? That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Lee. I'll throw out one other one, and that's when I believe she said to you, if you don't do a hearing on this, I'm going to call Amy Klobuchar directly. Is that possible? Okay, very good. All right, so I want to thank all of our witnesses. I think this was a good hearing because we had senators both sides of the aisle making very valid points about competition. It may have been a coincidence it was the first hearing of the entire Congress, but maybe not, because one, it was bipartisan, good sign for the Senate. Two, it was about competition, our economy, that goes way beyond the ticketing industry. As I pointed out, 75% of the industries in this country, we've seen more and more consolidation. We have an active Justice Department now and FTC. We have provided them funding because we actually know they bring money in when they do their job. But mostly, this is also has been reflected in so many of my colleagues' comments about fans. It is about those events that bring us together, and especially as we come out of this pandemic and come out of our 300 million plus silos, people have loved going to see live music again, to see live concerts, to be part of that experience. And one of our goals here, regardless of what state people are from or what party that they belong to, is to give them that experience, Mr. Lawrence, to make them feel part of a fan base and part of something that makes them feel good or makes them think about the lyrics to a song or makes them just rejoice in being part of our arts and part of our culture. So that's why you've seen this tremendous turnout here. We are very interested in actually doing something and not just throwing popcorn. I think you know we have been respectful throughout this hearing, and I think part of that is our desire to actually move on this issue. As I've noted, even getting the public's attention on this, and we thank the fans that may be still outside, we hope still watching on C-SPAN. I thank them for keeping this alive, and I thank all of you for your work in this important industry. But the solutions are there for the taking. Some of them are smaller things that can be done right away. Some of them are things that the Justice Department may order as either part of their oversight with the consent decree or new investigations or new outcomes, some of which have been discussed here. Some of them are things that we can do right here. And of course, we're always going to have some disagreements in this body. I don't think you're surprised over what the best course is. But there is some general agreement on some of these ideas when it comes to pricing and transparency and the like. And finally, our job is oversight and making sure that our agencies that actually do the work are funded so they can do it. And I'm proud of the work we did at the close of last year to do that. So with that, we're going to keep the record open for a week. I want to thank our staff for their work on it, and in particular, Mark and Avery and Kagan, who are behind me, and also Senator Lee's staff for their work on this, as well as Senator Grassley's staff over the many years on this issue, Senator Durbin for allowing us to have this hearing when we don't even have the subcommittees formed yet, so we can get working on this right away. So with that, the hearing record is going to remain open for 1 week until January 31st, 2023. Thank you very much. Hearing is now over and adjourned.
Yeah, I know.